that happens. I taught Islamic studies at LUMS for 6 years, right? And I basically taught them what I call the academic approach. Then there was a person who came later, and he insisted that no, you have to have an academic approach, but you must also adopt a secular approach. And you must not have a faith-based approach to Islamic studies. Another word they use for this in the West is called confessional. Confessional means that you confess, they call Iman confession, that you confess to believe in Islam. So they say, we're going to teach you Islam in a non-confessional way, right? So if that's what you mean by critical, yes, we accept that we're not going to question the idea, which I again told you in the beginning, the primary truths about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His attributes, Quran al-Kareem, and Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If that's what you mean by critical, then yes, we won't be able to do that, all right? But it doesn't mean you can't be analytical. Again, many faith-based Muslims and university students, again, they concede defeat, and they think that, oh, this person's right, and they're going to be all critical, and me, I'm a blind follower. No, you're not a blind follower. Analytical means you research, you analyze, you probe, you question, you discover, you assess, you reassess. You might even change your opinion and your position multiple times. You might even get confused. You might even say, I don't know. All of that is part of the analytical process. That's another very important thing. Ending the journey with I don't know is acceptable. And the great philosophers and great thinkers many times would do that. And this is a delusion to think that critical thinking means you would definitely know. Right? And again, the polemical approach also misuses these two things. So they will suggest, for example, that Ibn Hajar Asqalani, because he chose to adhere to the Shafi legal positions, he was uncritical, right? And the true way would be to be critical thinking like us and only follow the hadith. No, that's wrong. Ibn Hajar Asqalani, along with and due to his deep knowledge of hadith and his analytical study of hadith, he found it to be completely fine to adhere to a single legal methodology. And it wasn't in any way uncritical or blind following on his part. So now you can see sometimes these labels are used by people against each other, basically. And that's something you want to avoid. So obviously on this, again, on the first line, we want to be on the academic side, not on the polemic side. On the second side, we want to be analytical, because analytical includes everything that is good about being critical, without the negative aspect of it, that overly being critical of the primary truths or overly being critical of others. This is another thing, right? So the person who has an analytical approach to Shafi fiqh doesn't feel the need to be critical of Hanafis, right? Because he's fine. He says that they also have an analysis. I can respect multiple analyses. The person who's critical then often becomes, what the word says, critical. They end up critiquing others. And then they critique others, not just others, but any and everyone who holds a position different than theirs. And then this impacts that feeling of unity in the ummah. That impacts the spirit of unity in the ummah. And perhaps, unfortunately, the greatest culprits of this is the contemporary Salafi movement. Because if you see historically, if you look at Islamic history, there were different understandings of Islamic law. And the great jurists used to engage in analytical discussions, even debates with each other. But when they moved to social reality and the common people, they wouldn't critique one another publicly. There was never any Maliki scholar who traveled from Morocco to India and told them that Hanafi fiqh is wrong and you're praying the wrong way, you should pray my way. There was never any Hanbali scholar traditionally who traveled from Arabia and went to Malaysia and Indonesia and said, you're following Shafi fiqh, it's wrong, you should be Hanbali. They never did that on the public level. No doubt on their own high-level intellectual circles and in academic circles, they would have lots of interesting analytical discussions and even debates with each other. But at the public ummah level, they had complete respect and they would never speak out against anybody else, right? As opposed to today where you have people, literally funded by oil dollars to the extent of, millions and millions of dollars to travel the world and to tell people that what they're doing is wrong. And that creates schism and separation and tafarruqa in the ummah. All right? So be analytical, but try not to be critical of others. That's another aspect and another thing to learn over here. Right? I'll give you a personal example from myself, right? I personally don't believe that Muslims should form political parties and try to take over the government through the political party process, okay? But I don't critique Jamaat Islami. If they want to do it, I'm fine with it, as long as they do it in a way that, is within the Sharia, as long as they have ikhlas, and as long as they're people of deen. I don't stop it. I've never tried to go and stop Jamaat. I don't think, and the people who know me, I don't think there's any activity anybody could say I've ever done in my life which has actually been to try to stop them from what they do, right? They have their view. Their analysis has led them to that position. As long as they have ikhlas, right? As long as they're sincere and they're true, who knows? Maybe they'll succeed where I'll fail, right? Or maybe they'll succeed where others will fail, all right? The critical approach would be, no, we have to wipe them out. They should not exist. Everybody who's with them should leave them. It's completely false. And unfortunately, you'll find some people, they talk like that. They can't handle the existence of somebody whose analysis led them to a different position than their own. They want to obliterate that other thing, right? And so they're going back, can't be that you pray like this. You must stop praying. Why? You have to be able to handle this. That historically there have always been multiple positions in the ummah. All right, move to slide number 10. Slide number 10, if you look at the first line, textual and contextual. All right, so now I'm talking about texts of classical Islamic learning. Every text and every trend in Islamic scholarship had a context. So I'll give you some examples of that, right? It was an unfortunate thing. After the time of the Taba' Tabi'in, there was a lot of weird theological, philosophical sects that arose in Islam. So one of them is known as the Mu'tazila, all right? The Mu'tazila in Arabic, the Mu'tazilis in English, all right? It's a very, and it's a very interesting thing to learn about them, and you actually learn a lot when learning about them. And that's something you have to be open to learning about these people, all right? Now, I'm really gonna very simplify this. Let's just say they came to some understandings that the mufassirun, muhaddisun, fuqaha, the Islamic scholars of the time felt were not acceptable and were incorrect. All right. Now there were different ideas on how we should counter this. One group felt that we should try to counter them on their own terms. And so they devised a particular branch of learning, which you can say wasn't really around at the time of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the time of Sahaba. And that is called Ilmul Kalam. And Ilmul Kalam in English means dialectical theology. It's debate in dialectics on these theological issues of the attributes of Allah Ta'ala and on many things. Ilmul Kalam. All right? So there was a person, for example, by the name of Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. And he actually developed this Ash'ari Kalam, this way of engaging the Mu'tazilis in a way that was so successful that then all the Mu'tazilis basically retracted their position or just faded within 1 century. Now when that's done, me and you, we can pick up Ash'ari Kalam and put it back on the shelf. We don't need it now because that had a particular context. That wasn't there in the earlier time, and it wasn't needed in a later time. It was only done in order to correct the misunderstandings that the Mu'tazilas had arrived at and were trying to lead others to. So a mistake would be somebody who just does text and doesn't does context. They will dig up some Ash'ari Aqidah text and they will pull it out and they will try to teach some of these very fine points. And this doesn't happen in Pakistan, alhamdulillah. In the UK, it's a very interesting thing. In the UK, there are people who dig up these centuries-old, very complicated philosophical, theological kalam texts, and they revive those debates. They revive those debates, and they're not actually even qualified to do this, and they make many mistakes. And it's a very dangerous area because Ilmul Kalam is talking about Aqidah and Iman. And really for us it's enough, most of the people who attend their courses don't yet even know what I mentioned at the very start, don't even know the verses on Iman in the Quran. They don't even know the hadith that the Prophet mentioned about Iman. And they're being taught this hardcore philosophical, theological texts. That's wrong. You have to understand that certain things had a particular context. I'll give you another example. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, I think all of you know him, right? He was living 10 centuries ago. Now, he developed an articulation of tasawwuf, all right? There was one aspect of his articulation of tasawwuf which I think can be left on the shelf because that was due to a particular context. And what was that? That he had engaged some philosophers, and he's known for this, writing this work, Tahafut al-Falasifa. He was trying to, again, address the misunderstandings that philosophers had come to. And he realized that some of them are very good people, and some of them are very impressed with the Greek philosophy about virtue and character and ethics. So in some of his works, in some places, he tried to take classical pure Islamic tazkiyah or tasawwuf and explain it in Greek philosophical terms in order to attract those philosophers and say, look, if this is something you're interested in, you can get this from Deen. You can get this from Deen. So he tried to create a munasaba. He tried to create some affinity and compatibility for the philosophers in the more proper Islamic understanding of spirituality, right? Now, when he chose to do that, if you were to read it today, you would say, oh, this is kind of weird, and why is he using these Greek terms, and why is he being so philosophical about it? These things are just explained more easily, more simply, more directly from the Quran and Sunnah. So he was doing it for a reason. There was a particular context for that. And if you ask me, I think he did the right thing. For example, today, if I meet a Muslim who has become an atheist, may Allah Ta'ala protect everybody's iman, and he starts talking to me using the terms of, Enlightenment philosophy, I will hit him back with the same terms. I'm not going to throw verses of Quran and Hadith on him. It's not going to work on him. He's operating from another frame of reference. I have to go into his world and take him out. And when I take him out, then I can bring him into the proper world of proper Islamic learning, right? Khair, that's one way, right? And if there's somebody who's more inspirational than me, would maybe have so much power and tasir that they just quote one verse of Quran or they just recite Quran and they melt that person's heart, right? There are different methods that have to be used. So Imam al-Ghazali did that with a particular context. So again, if you ask me, we can leave those parts of his text aside because he himself also didn't mean it for me and you. He didn't want that people like me and you would understand tasawwuf and tazkiyah in that way. He only wanted the people who were philosophers and were in love with Greek virtue ethics to understand tasawwuf in that way, right? So this is an example of text and context, all right? If you look at the next line, then we have those three words, historical, intellectual, and spiritual. Now, I've given you examples of historical as well now, right? And intellectual you've understood. Now, the third thing left is spiritual, all right? Spiritual is that let's begin with the first thing I mentioned, that everything has to be done ultimately for the sake of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes for different people, different ways and methods of learning might bring you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure in a different way, right? For example, and you should also even look at this yourself. There are some people who initially, I'm talking about the initial stages, ultimately everybody should want to learn everything. But initially what you have to do is whatever aspect of Islamic learning attracts you, inspires you, motivates you, you should run with that. For some people, it might start with Seerah. It's not necessary that everybody has to start with Quran. You have to end up learning all these things. For some people, it might be Seerah. For sometimes children, it's stories of the prophets, stories of Sahaba, right? We might teach them stories of the prophets and stories of Sahaba even before we teach them Quran. Now, that doesn't mean somebody tries to, again, engage this polemical critique on us. Oh, ye to Quran hi nahi padhate. They don't even teach Quran. No, we're coming there. But our understanding of these children is when we try to teach them our experience, when we try to teach them Quran, they sort of, start falling asleep in class, or they weren't able to connect to it. So we're trying to inspire them first with some stories. We're telling them stories about the Prophet himself, stories about the other prophets, stories about Sahaba. No doubt, ultimately, because I'm going to show you, it's coming later in the slides, I'm going to show you a whole package of Islamic studies, which I didn't do for you last time, of what I think, where you should begin and how you should continue. Right? So this is spiritual. For an adult learner, it might be the case for some people, mashallah, that even just listening to Quran, They say, I love such and such a qari, and I love to listen to their recitation, and just listening to the recitation melts my heart. I'll say, okay, fine, run with that. I'm not going to tease them and say, oh, look, you're just listening to the qari, you haven't learned Arabic yet, you don't know Arabic, you can't understand, leave your listening and come to me, I'm going to teach you Arabic. You have to be very careful in displacing people. If there's something that's working for them, yes, you can add to it. You can gently show them that, okay, imagine how much his recitation would impact you if you understood what he's saying, but don't very quickly pluck them away from something that's working for them spiritually. And track this about yourself also. And that's why people should have multiple things that they're doing, because there might be someday it shouldn't be like this. But Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran is thaqeel. The Quran is heavy. And for some people, they're not always ready. They're not always able to pick up the Quran and just open up the tafsir and start reading it. So have something light. Have a seerah book on your table. Have some spiritual motivational book on your table. Have some bayans in some Islamic motivational lectures on your recorder. You should always keep in mind that it should never be dry. Khushk, what we say, should never be empty of spirituality. You have to find what will connect your heart closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the second aspect of this meaning of spiritual is it has to be linked to practice. Historical knowledge isn't going to change your amal. Intellectual knowledge is not going to change your amal. But when you're doing it for the sake of the spiritual quality of taqwa, when you're doing it for the spiritual quality of ikhlas, you will realize you have to do amal also. It's not just about ilm. It's not just about ilm. There has to be amal. There has to be amal. There has to be amal. And that's another difference between the faith-based and secular-based approach. And we do believe in that. A person who does amal, who prays, who is pious, who has taqwa, Allah Ta'ala is al-hadi. He will give them hidayah to understandings of Quran that a secularist will never be able to get. How did he get that? Not through his learning, through his amal, through his a'mal. That's also a spiritual understanding about Islam. Amal leads to ilm. Normally we talk about it the other way, right? That you need ilm, so then you do amal on it. You need to acquire knowledge, so you practice it, right? No doubt, but it works the other way also, in a very major way. And that's actually, if you were to look at one of the greatest common features of all the great ulama of our ummah, they were all sahib amal. And this is a beautiful phrase in our deen, sahib. Sahib amal means the person who did so much amal. He's called a sahib, a companion to amal. Means him and amal were always together. A person of practice. And so it's very important when we study. If you, for example, join a Quran studies course, and you find that after 2-3 months your tajweed is better, your understanding of tafsir is better. But is your recitation better? Is your feeling? You have to track your amal also. Are you reciting more? Are you feeling more? Or is it only your ilm is going up? That's dangerous. If only your ilm is going up and your amal isn't going up also, then you're not properly learning in the Islamic sense. So to be a learner and a student and a seeker of knowledge in Islam means that as you increase your ilm, you must increase your amal. And that's the only way that would be called a spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And any and every time, without exception, that the ilm goes up and the amal stays the same, dangerous. Dangerous. And the end result, not in the beginning, but ultimately the end of that is called nifaq. That's a munafiq who has knowledge but doesn't practice it. Right? And the third aspect of the word spiritual is experience. So, okay, I know it, I practice it, but I'm not experiencing it. So you should have a fikr for that. You should have a fikr that, okay, I know I should pray. Okay, I practice praying. Okay, alhamdulillah, I don't have that nifaq, that I don't do amal on my own. I'm doing amal, but I don't experience it. So that sometimes in Arabic that's called hal, but I don't want to say the word hal because then you might think of people dancing around somebody's grave while being drunk. That's not called hal. Hal means that you experience the qurb in sajda that you learned that Allah Ta'ala said in Quran that makes sajda and you will feel qurb. You have to experience it. Right? And that's the real purpose of knowledge. Even beyond practice, the ultimate purpose of knowledge is experience. That, okay, like I did for you the translation. Let's say somebody said, I don't know about the translation. Sami Allahu liman hamida. Rabbana. Okay, I did the translation. You got the knowledge. Okay, you can practice it. You say it. But you will only get lutf. Lutf, you will enjoy it when you experience that from your heart, the feeling of hamd, the feeling of praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that moment in salah. So you have to go all the way. So that's just what I'm using this one word spiritual, right? So again, don't worry about the tags and labels. They're just things for our own understanding to understand. So if I say the word spiritual now, you'll understand what I mean, right? It means it has to be done for the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala, has to be for practice, and has to be for experience, all right? So that's all I mean by the word spiritual, nothing more at this moment, okay? Now the last line over here on slide number 10. Is combining and reconciling multiple approaches, all right? Because that's what I'm going to suggest. You have to do all of this. You have to be historical, intellectual, spiritual. You have to be textual and contextual. You have to be academic. You have to be analytical. You have to understand Iman, understand Islam, understand Ihsan, understand social reality. And you cannot deny the basis of secular. You cannot deny science. You can not outright deny rationality. You have to find a way to incorporate that also, to have an understanding of deen, which does not mean that you have to renounce science or renounce rationality, all right? And obviously, the very first thing we mentioned, you must always be true to the primary truths of Islam. So you have to combine and reconcile all of these things. Combine to reconcile. Reconcile means, let's take a verse from Quran. Sometimes there's a verse in Quran that if you look at its text, it will have one meaning. If you look at its context, it will have a slightly different meaning. Now, when it comes to Quran al-Kareem, context means two things. First, context means that what's called siyaq wa sibaq, what's going on in that part of Quran before and after that ayah. That's the first meaning of context. Second meaning of context is when was this ayah revealed? So in other words, what was going on in Sirah? The life of the Prophet ﷺ as it unfolds is itself the context of Quran, and then the revelation of Quran as Allah Ta'ala has what we call not the tirtib and nuzuli, but the way Allah Ta'ala told the Prophet ﷺ to arrange the verses of Quran, that is also a context of Quran. So two contexts of Quran. Now last year, if I remember correctly, we explained this concept to you, which is called umum fil ma'na, that there might be a verse that has a particular context, but it also has a more general lesson. And you need both of them. You need both of them. All right? Let me see what can be a good example. I can do this for you. So I can give you, in fact, to connect it to last year, an example I gave you from Quran for some other in the course of some other lecture last year. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran al-Kareem, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Okay, ask the Ahl al-Dhikr. I'm going to leave it untranslated for a reason. Ask the Ahl al-Dhikr إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ if you do not know. Right? Now the original context of revelation in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, if you take that, then Ahl al-Dhikr means the Ahl Kitab. Ahl Kitab, right? Because the Ahl Kitab at that time actually had some level of true scriptures preserved. Some of it had already been fabricated, forged, adulterated, right, altered, but they had some elements of truth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew, obviously because Allah knows everything, that they had enough truth to recognize the truth of the Prophet ﷺ. And there are many verses of in the Quran, and even many hadith also that talk about this. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءُهُم, that they recognize you, marifat, that they recognize you the same way they recognize their own sons. What does it mean? They recognize you to be the true Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like they recognize that child to truly be their own son. Right? Okay? So this is the original context. Ask them if you don't know. Because they know, they do know. They know. Right? Now today, if I say by Ahl al-Dhikr you should take Ahl Kitab, so today, no, today that's not the case. Now look at today's context. Today the Ahl Kitab don't know. They truly don't know. Judaism, Christianity has evolved further. to such a way that there's no element in it that on its own they can recognize the truth of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They will need some dawah effort. They will need some explanation of Islam, some understanding of Islam. On their own, they don't know, right? So the question then would then be that if we do umum, when we're trying to find the general meaning of this verse, because that's one aspect of Quran that every verse in some way must have a lesson for every Muslim for all times. And in some way, in some sense, must be able to be practiced or experienced or understood for every Muslim at all times. So how do we understand this verse, right? So then, when the Mufassirun, the ulama of tafsir, then take out the general. So then now, understand its text, understand the text in its context, but sometimes take it out of its context also. So this I'm saying, reconciling multiple approaches. Then you will get a different understanding. Then it simply means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying what to us in Quran. Ask the people who remember if you don't know, right? Rather, let me translate it more precisely. Ask the people of remembrance if you don't know, right? What does it mean? The Ahl Dhikr then, in this meaning, in the general meaning, means that the people who have ilm, they know, and they practice and they experience. That's called dhikr in our deen, right? So you would understand the meaning of dhikr from the other verses of Quran on dhikr, right? In what other ways and senses has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word dhikr in Quran? Now this is a very fine point in tafsir. You can't always plug all of them in elsewhere. In other words, all the other senses in which Allah Ta'ala has used the word dhikr in Quran, I can't plug all of them in here in replacement of Ahl Dhikr, right? This is a fun. This is exactly what the qualified scholar knows and what the unqualified like me and you don't know, right? Second, there's a lughi mana also. One is the simple Arabic lexical dictionary meaning of the word dhikr. That's just remembrance. When can you take out the textual, contextual meaning and insert the lughi meaning? This is also a field of scholarship, right? So part of this reconciling multiple approaches is a bit more of a scholarly, scholastic activity, but anyway, I wanted to show it for you, right? So if we were to go through this whole exercise on this ayah, right? And then again, you would find multiple positions. There would be some ulama of tafsir who would allow you to use, let's say, 5 meanings of the word dhikr for Ahl Dhikr. Some would allow you only to use 3. Some would allow you to use 7. Some would exhibit no preference and say all 5 can equally be used. Some would do tarjih and exhibit a preference for one over the other. Some might suggest all time. It says the whole world when you enter tafsir. All right? And in fact, really, if a person goes through tafsir or hadith commentary, you will see exactly this. It's exactly when you combine and reconcile multiple approaches that your tafsir ends up being 10, 15, 20 volumes, mashallah, as the great ulama of tafsir did. It's exactly when you do this that your commentary on hadith ends up in 20, 25, 30 volumes, as the great muhaddithin did. All right? And if a person was just doing single, narrow-minded, polemical, ideological approach, you just need 1 or 2 volumes to do that. You don't need so many volumes to do that. All right? This last part then a person will understand maybe at the more intermediate or advanced stage of Islamic learning. All right, so we move then to slide 11. Where to begin? Where to begin? So I'd mentioned that I felt that people who want to increase their Islamic knowledge and learning, they don't always follow a systematic way. You will see in anything in life, if you follow a systematic plan of action and you put in effort systematically with hard work and discipline, you will acquire more, and you will acquire it sooner and faster, and you will acquire it easier, and you will acquire it in a deeper way. And if you just randomly do, because unfortunately a lot of people, they just randomly surf different websites, they randomly read different books they find, and this random, unplanned, non-systematic way, they certainly learn some things, but then they still have other gaps. And then like I told you, they're missing what I want you people to try to get is that overall vision and understanding of Islam. Because that what puts a person into practice and experience. And individual tidbits of information, more often than not, aren't able to guide us to practice and experience. All right? So slide number 11 is where to begin. So slide number 12. So slide number 12 first. And again, these aren't in order. I'm giving you all of the things to begin with. I'm giving you multiple beginnings, right? So in fact, why don't you show all of it? Show all of slide number 12 so that part gets clear. So this first slide 12 is where to begin. Number 1. All 3 of them is the first place to begin. The Quran, the Seerah, and the Sunnah Hadith of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this is where you will begin, and you will never leave this beginning. You will always need this. There's no advanced stage of Islamic learning where you will go beyond these 3 things, right? Now, there are different ways to begin, all right? One is a random bayan listening, random course attending, random reading that all of you already know how to do. Okay, there's several systematic ways to do this. So let's start with the first one, Quran al-Kareem. Obviously, the first systematic way would be to sit down with a alim, ba'amal, from Ahl dhikr, from Ahl taqwa, from Salihin, who at least, if not maybe a full level mufassir himself, but has learnt from them, has been an adept and student and apprentice to mufassirun, right? And to ask them to systematically guide you through tafsir of the entire Quran. That could be one way to begin this. Second way would be not to do the entire Quran in the beginning, right? Ultimately, you want to progress to that. But to begin rather with a selection of surahs. For some people, you know, if you really do an in-depth tafsir of Surah Baqarah, for some people, they can't even last in that. They find it too heavy, too detailed. They say, oh, you know, couldn't we start with Surah Kahf or Surah Waqia, or I read Surah Kahf on Fridays, maybe I could learn about that first because I already recite that a lot. Maybe I recite Surah Yasin a lot, Surah Mulk a lot. So that could be another way. Okay, you take some selection of surahs. You might even identify them yourself. Like I said, spiritual. What surahs do you recite more? What do you connect with you more? Let's start with what you know and let's see how far you can go. Let's say there's somebody who says, I recite Surah Mulk every night. I say, okay, let's see how far you can go in tafsir of Surah Mulk. And let's see how far that additional tafsir will give you more feelings about Surah Mulk. And let's just run with that for some time before you even move to any other part of Quran. That could be one way to do it. Another way is that there are different ways that different ulama have done these selections from Quran. So one selection is what we tried to do for our Quranic studies course in Ihsan Institute, is that what I tried to do was go in the hadith and any and every surah which Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned some fazila, some virtues, some merit, like Surah Yusuf, like Surah Kahf, that you start with those, right? Another way could be to start with those passages which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins with, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. That, okay, at least let me understand that when Allah ta'ala has addressed me as alladhina amanu and told me to do something, let me learn those things first. Another would be to, okay, let me start by looking at the Asma al-Husna in Quran. Another way could be, and that's the next workshop we have planned for you in April, inshallah, is to go through all the du'as in the Quran. All the du'as in Quran, inshallah ta'ala. Alright, that could be another way to do it. Another way some people do it for the social reality part. So let me show you that also how we go, because I haven't shown you too much of that. Is to say, okay, let me look at those passages in Quran where Allah Ta'ala mentions all the problems, pitfalls, deviations of past communities. And then understand how and where the ummah might go away today. What can the ummah today learn from the mistakes of Qawm Ad, of Qawm Thamud, from the Bani Israel, etc., etc. That could be another way. Selection. All of these selections would not go beyond 3 to 5 juz, right? So you're talking about really a very, small introductory entry point, right? There could be other ways also, right? I gave you enough examples. There can be other ways where to begin. Another way to begin in Quran is to improve your tajweed. All right. Sometimes when you recite better, means more properly, that opens up more nur of the Quran. No doubt if you totally understand, it's not going to open up the ilm of Quran, but it opens up more nur of Quran, shifa of Quran. As mentioned, this Quran is a shifa. It's a healer for the hearts. All right. Sometimes it helps your concentration. So there's a barakah in reciting properly. You will understand this. There's a sweetness when you recite properly. And the sweetness of reciting properly will enable you, inshallah, to get the sweetness of the qurb of Allah Ta'ala inside salah. Another way is tahfiz, to memorize more, so that you can use some new ayahs, new surahs when you pray. Otherwise, some people, they just use Walasr and Inna Atena Kal-Kawthar and Qul Ya Al-Kafirun and Qul Ahad and every single sunnah, nafil salah that they pray. The only time they ever go outside the last 20 surahs is if they happen to pray behind an imam in jama'ah, then whatever he recites, they get to hear it. But any and every prayer, they pray on their own. Abhi nahi kare. This you do in lunchtime and yeah. So they don't memorize. So even if you memorize just 2-3 ayahs, there's some ayahs. It depends on the local imam of your masjid. There's some imams who are very fond of certain passages and they recite them quite often in Fajr. And if you become a regular Fajr Muqtadi behind them, you almost memorize that yourself, right? If there's any passage like that as soon as the imam says the first 3 words, you know where he's going, you've almost got it. Just find it in the Quran, memorize it, and start using it yourself. And then rework it, fix your tajweed just in that passage, learn the tafsir of just that passage, try to build it, do everything you can to experience it. All right? These are the places you should. I'm giving you a few examples. Now you should be able, all of you should be able to think creatively for yourself now. And think how, and what I'm trying to create is a mizaj, a temperament that, look, you want to experience Quran. It's not going to happen on its own. You're going to have to do these things, some or all of these things that I'm talking about. You have to put your time in it, your effort in it, your heart in it. You have to have talab, and you have to put sa'i, you have to put effort in that journey. And then Allah Ta'ala will give. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bestow. He is a being of immense fazl. All right? Second place is seerah. It's very important that we know the life of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? And I would say here, don't try to be so systematic that first I will start with Nabi Adam alayhi salam, learn all the lives of all the prophets. It's going to be too late. Right? Start here. In any case, because my personal feeling is that the lives of all of the other prophets should also be read in light of the seerah. The seerah is a shara, is a commentary on even the lives of the other Anbiya and Mursalin alayhim as-salam ajma'in. Alright? Now here again, if option number 1, systematic, find some scholar of seerah and systematically go through the entire seerah with him. Right? That could be a possibility. Second, pick some entry point, pick something, pick Fateh Makkah, pick Hijrah, pick the 2 years after Fateh Makkah, pick the first 2 years, pick something small and read 10 different seerah books, read that chapter. So I'm going to read the chapter on Fateh Makkah in 10 books. Then when I do that, I'll get an idea. Then you won't have to ask me, which seerah book do you recommend? If you read 10 authors on that chapter, you yourself will be able to tell which one inspires you more, which one's writing style you like more, which one, you connected more. You'll be able to tell yourself. You just need to read one chapter. I'm telling you, you just have to read one chapter in 10 books, you'll know. It's okay if 10 is too much, 5, 3, pick something, pick 3, start with 3 if you want. You'll get an idea. Maybe you might say, I love all 3, I'm going to read all 3. That's also a good thing. You wouldn't have gotten that jazba if I told you to read all 3. But when you read one chapter from all 3 and fell in love with all 3 of the books, then you truly will read all 3. Just me giving you a list isn't going to do it. Because I've done this many times. I've given people many lists. And I can't remember, except for a few, anybody ever even coming back to me with the follow-up that, yeah, I read those books that you wrote down for me. Asking for lists, I can think of hundreds of people. Maybe thousands even, but definitely hundreds who have asked me, tell me what book to read, make me a list, make me a syllabus, right? You have to dig in a little bit yourself and see, right? It's the syllabus that you choose for yourself that you end up reading, all right? But, I will, let me finish the explanation and I will give you some, because some people do need recommendations, so I will give you some recommendations, all right? Third thing is Sunnah and Hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So why don't I start with this? I would recommend to you Riyadh al-Salihin, right? A simple Riyadh al-Salihin. Right? Simple means without any of these crazy polemical footnotes, because I always feel it's very unfair when a person takes a great scholar's work and then adds her own ideological footnotes. I said, look, you should publish that under your own name. If anybody really wants to hear what you think, they'll buy it. I have no problem with that. You should write it separately. But to use Imam an-Nawawi's name and know that people are going to buy his work because they want to learn the hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu that he compiled, and then to sneak in your stuff along with it, that's not a nice thing to do, right? So the Riyadh al-Salihin of Imam an-Nawawi has been translated actually in 2 at least English translations that I'm aware of, and definitely has been translated into Urdu, and the Arabic original obviously is there. All right. This is Imam an-Nawawi compiled this work of hadith particularly for this niyyah, and he was a great hadith scholar. That if people want to read hadith on their own, what should they read? All right. So this all shows you, some ulama have this concern. They have this fikr. They did the work. So then, when you know that the hadith scholars have actually thought about that if somebody wants to read hadith on their own, what should they read? Then you should read that book, right? And if you want to start even with something smaller, then obviously the smallest is his Arba'in, which is Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah collection of 40 hadith, all right? So one could start with that, and one could move to Riyadh al-Salihin, the complete by Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah. And those of you who feel more audio, so there's a very good rendering in Urdu, Mufti Ahmad Khan Puri. If you Google this, Ahmad Khan Puri, Khanpuri, so you can listen to his whole Urdu series on Riyadh al-Salihin. That's all there on the website for you to download. All right. Some people, they have a lot of time in commuting in car, and they prefer audio. All right. Okay. And here, so I began with the recommendation first. Now let me explain. In the Sunnah and Hadith, for the average user, for the non-scholar, first and foremost for you are the non-legal Hadith. Again, this is also a great tragedy that different polemical ideological groups, in order to convert you to their ideology, they insist on giving you courses with the legal Hadith. The legal Hadith, believe me, are a very wide maze that requires navigation skills. Right? It can be 100% can be done. And it is done, and it's done at a level of brilliance. All right? You need the hadith that inspire your heart, that talk about Jannah, that talk about Jahannam, that talk about adab, that talk about akhlaq, that, you talk about tawbah, that talk about ikhlas. And alhamdulillah, this is exactly what Imam an-Nawawi has done. So it's not my position. This is the fact that Imam an-Nawawi has almost, with hardly few exceptions, has included no real legal hadith and no hadith on matters of ikhtilaf between jurists in his Riyadh al-Salihin. It means this was the understanding of the hadith scholars, that the person who wants to read and study hadith on their own, they should not do the legal hadith. All right? And Ibn Hajar Asqalani, he compiled that hadith for Al-Bulugh al-Maram for Shafi fuqaha, for Shafi jurists, not for ordinary people. Right? Okay? So this should be, and you should ponder over the hadith. It's not about the numbers that, okay, I read 50 a day. No. How many can you practice and experience in a day? Read one and think how you can practice it in your life. How it can change your life. How it can bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep working at it. And then that's the real question to ask a scholar. Rather than ask us what book to read, show up and say, I read this chapter in Riyadh al-Salihin, and out of the 12 hadith in that chapter, there are 10 that I've been able to figure out what's the lesson for me in my life in terms of practice experience. These other 2 I can't figure out what's the lesson for me. Can you guide me on how I can practice and experience these 2 also? That's a question to ask. You don't ask the ulama and imams the right questions. If you ask a question like that, believe me, he'll sit down with you and he'll give you time. You have to show your talab. You have to bring true talab. Right? All right? So this was my basic thing here on where to begin. On Sirah, there's a very good book. I'm going to give you the more longer one. And it's in Arabic and in Urdu, not in English. I'll give you some English recommendations also. It's called Sirat al-Halabi. So there was an Allama Halabi rahimahullah ta'ala who lived in the medieval period, and he basically took the best of all of the classical and late classical seerah works and took only the most authentic and authoritative narrations in them. And if I remember, the Urdu one is 3 volumes. Sirat al-Halabi. Arabic and Urdu, but unfortunately not yet in English. Those of you who want a shorter work in Urdu, then there's a seerah by Maulana Muhammad Idris Khan Delvi Ramtale. And if you want a very short one, there's one by Mufti Muhammad Shafi Ramtale. Then, obviously, there's the seerah. There's so many works of seerah, actually. Allama Shibli Numani has his own angles and very interesting things, especially about the social reality part and the historical part. Very good for that. For those of you who are in English, let me shift to English. There's also the Sealed Nectar. I think that, I don't know if that's available in Urdu or not. It probably is. It's an Arabic work, but this is translated in English and is available in Urdu. I don't know under which name. Ajah, that's the Arabic name. Okay, so it's available in Urdu under its Arabic original name. And then there's a very interesting book that came out recently in English. Unfortunately, it's a bit expensive. The person priced it that way because he gives all the he doesn't take any money from the book. He gives all of it to, in fact, 2, 3, 4 different institutions of Islamic learning in America. It's called Revelation, the life or the story of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for teenagers and university youth, this is probably the very single best seerah book I can recommend, because it's written in a textbook style. What does that mean? There's charts, there's maps, there's figures, there's glossaries, there are timelines, there are chronologies. If you really want to study seerah, because sometime in this, it's a very interesting thing, because this person writes this about himself in the introduction. He says he was listening to a seerah, a series of talks on seerah by Hamza Yusuf. That's also for your audio types. Imam Hamza Yusuf has this English audio series on seerah. And he writes that, I was listening to this and I got so confused. There were so many names and of people and so many dates and so many events and so many wars and so many tribes and Banu this. He says, I couldn't figure it out. And then he says that Hamza Yusuf, during the talks, himself said that some of you are probably getting confused by the names and dates. I wish somebody would compile all these things down. Something like that, I can't remember. There's some story like that, he says, in the prologue. So he says, I decided to do it. And I took pen and paper and I started writing down all the names and all the dates and the sequence and the chronology and the timeline. And before you know it, he wrote a whole book on seerah. It took him 13 years. He's a doctor. He's a medical doctor, anesthesiologist in America. And he had it very expert layout and design, and it's an incredible resource of learning. Somebody recently told me there's an Urdu book similar to that, that we have that in Hassan Institute. Do you remember its name? We don't know its name, but he'll find out the name and we'll tell you tomorrow, inshallah. Is it? Okay, maybe it's called Seerah's Encyclopedia by Darus Salam, new edition, right? No, that 11 volumes. No, this is a single volume, this is 11 volumes. Okay, so there are 11 of them. That's if you really want to go very deep. The English one I'm telling you is one volume. It's one book. I have it actually, I can show it to you. All right. So anyway, there's a lot. As you can see, there's a lot of, you need to see what works for you, what you have access to. But the point is you need to start learning. For Quran, I still very strongly recommend that you have a living teacher. Even though no doubt there's a lot of tafsir in Urdu and English that I could recommend. Just because I will be very honest with you, the people who didn't have a living teacher for Quran, a lot of them went astray. I'm not saying astray from the faith, but they went astray in some understanding, on some hukum of Sharia, on some historical narration. So I've seen too many dangers and pitfalls from that. With a teacher, along with the teacher, no doubt, then you have to have your own reading and your own study, along with having a teacher. Just like universities, right? When you take a professor, it doesn't mean you don't do any reading. No, it doesn't mean that. You have a professor, but you have a syllabus. So don't ever get fooled by somebody that, if I tell you to take a teacher, it means I'm telling you to be blind. No. You have a professor, you have a syllabus, you do your readings, but you have a professor also. You need to have both. And this combination of readings plus professor that works so well in every other system of learning, in every other discipline, in every other field of knowledge, believe me, it works so well in Islamic learning also, right? So you need a syllabus of readings and you need a professor and an instructor, all right? But we have found, that this Ma'ariful Quran and Anwarul Bayan, these two are in English and in Urdu, obviously, and they, I think, truly capture the classical tafsir tradition. And then there are many other modernist and sort of ideological tafsir out there. Then that depends on your own ideological persuasion. Okay? But these two, I think, generally pretty much just capture the classical Islamic tradition of tafsir. The Arabic tafsirs, sort of coalesced into Urdu and English. All right? So this is where you have to begin. And you have to keep working on it, because the greatest guidance, the greatest practice, the greatest experience, the greatest feelings comes from these three things, right? Comes from there. Obviously, there are things that aren't here, because I said where to begin. I'm not giving you everything. I haven't mentioned stories of Sahaba. There's many things that aren't. Islamic history is not here. There are many things that aren't on this first page. All right? If you move to the second slide, slide number 13. You can show all of slide number 13. This, what it says where to begin, but I would say that if you want to continue, where would you go, right? So slide 13 and 14 together, I'm going to mention to you 6 things that once you have a good solid foundation in Quran, Seerah, Sunnah, and Hadith, then if you want to go further, where would you go? So there's 6 things. 3 are on the slides here and the next, so I will just read them to you. The 3 on slide 13 are Islamic spirituality, classical Islamic learning, Arabic. And on slide 14 is Islamic studies, necessary fiqh, Islamic scholarly tradition. All right? By Islamic spirituality, I mean purification of the heart, what we call tazkiyah. How to rid yourself of anger, of envy, of unlawful lust. How to adorn yourself with the good adab, good akhlaq of humility, truth, sincerity. This is a very important thing pertaining to practice and experience, but you do need knowledge. There is a knowledge in our deen how to do these things. So you need that knowledge, but it's focused on practice and experience. Similarly, the knowledge of how to concentrate more on salah, how to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more, how to feel more in du'as. This is also proper knowledge that is geared towards practice and experience. Classical Islamic learning means that a person reads some of the great authors of the past. That might be Imam al-Ghazali, that might be Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya rahimahullah ta'ala, that might be somebody earlier, might be somebody more contemporary, might be some ulama of Hind, right? But you engage basically authored works, right? I mean, obviously the Quran, Seerah authored works, but it's about the Prophet ﷺ. We're talking about engaging authored works. And the third thing that's on this slide is Arabic, all right? If you really want to go deeper, then ultimately you will have to learn the Arabic language. That said, I don't think that all of you should necessarily make intention beyond basic Quranic Arabic, because once you have basic Quranic Arabic, there's actually a lot you can do in Urdu and English now. So the amount of knowledge that you would be able to get through Urdu and English may well be something that could occupy you for years. It might be sufficient for a life of practice and experience. The only exception, like if you notice I mentioned, is Quranic Arabic. Quranic Arabic is something else, and classical Arabic is something else. Quranic Arabic, there are short courses that would enable you to understand about 80 to 90% of Quran by listening to it. That's sufficient for you, right? Classical Arabic means you can pick up Ghazali, you can pick up Tafsir, you can pick up Asqalani, you can pick up and read it as fluently as you're able to read English or Urdu. That's a lot of effort to get that level of Arabic. It's a lot of effort. And I just think that for people who aren't doing scholarship full-time, do you really want to put all that effort into getting that fluent in Arabic? Because that same amount of effort, you could have actually learnt the knowledge itself in Urdu and English, right? But anyway, I mean, just so you know, I mean, that's something that's there. If you look at the next slide, 14, Islamic studies. Now, by Islamic studies, I mean the type of thing I'm doing for you today. This is for you, a very hard case. Something I've never spoken about publicly is that hard. Something I'm even too scared to talk about myself, right? And I'm not so sure, and I'm still not so sure looking at all of you, really should I do it or not? Because I'm going to myself fumble and stumble along the way. That's how hard it is. But I wanted to show you that we can fumble and stumble along the way. It's okay, all right? You can fumble and stumble on one particular matter while still walking upright and running on the rest of your deen. That's what I need to somehow train you on. As opposed to when I fumbled and stumbled on this matter, I fell flat in my whole deen. All right? It's a very hard case. It's not Freewill. Freewill is also a hard case that's coming later. Before that, I'm going to do even harder one. An even harder one. All right? Okay. The other thing is that I want you to always tell yourself that you're not questioning faith. You're not questioning Iman. You have a question. You're not questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't equate that. All the atheism, agnosticism, secularism wants you to think that. Don't have that fear. You are not questioning Allah Ta'ala. You are not questioning the truth of your deen. You have a question, but you're not questioning your faith. You're not questioning your deen. You're not questioning your iman. You're seeking knowledge. You're seeking knowledge. All right? Okay. So basically, this is what I was doing. How to deal with this is. I mean, I can't start it obviously because at 1:15 we break for the Dhuhr Salah. But I mean, this is what I'm talking to you about: is how to deal with doubts and skepticisms and struggling to understand. So if you move to slide 17, failing to understand. So this part I will do for you, and the hard cases part I'll do when we resume, inshallah. You also have to accept this, that sometimes there will be some things that you fail to understand. That itself can be a resolution. And no problem. I don't understand this one thing about Sharia, about Hadith, about Sunnah, about Seerah, about Quran, about Tafsir. I don't understand this one thing. Could be a few things, but start with one. I understand this one thing. It doesn't matter. It's not going to take me away from my deen. It doesn't take me away from Iman. Why? Because there's so many other reasons why I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala other than just one thing. It's not like this was the only thing. If this was the only reason and the only thing, then yes, obviously you might end up abandoning your faith. You have to remind yourself of that. For example, especially when I used to teach at university, used to get a lot of students, they would make this mistake. They heard one thing, and especially normally they got misinformation or propaganda from one of the atheist Marxist professors about Islam. But it shook them up so badly. They were questioning their very Iman. So no, you can question this matter. You can question Sadi. Don't make that leap that you have to question your whole Iman, your whole deen because of this. All right? And you might not be able to understand. What do you do when you fail to understand? This is an important thing in our deen. You have to believe in it without understanding it. You have to accept that. And if somebody calls us blind, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with blind faith. If having blind faith about one matter enables me to keep my complete perception faith about everything else. All right? That means you will have to believe in it without understanding it. 99% of the time, these things have nothing to do with your own amal, with your own practice. They won't be things that you'll be asked about on the Day of Judgment. You're going to see when I do, even free will, you just think that after Zohar we're going to do two examples. One really hard and very awkward. And you'll understand when I say devastating. And second, free will. And you will fail to understand it completely when I do it after Zohar. Because I don't even have complete understanding of those things. So obviously the person who's teaching you doesn't have complete understanding. There's no way you can have a hope that students have complete understanding. Right? But you can believe in it completely while this is the punchline, while understanding it partially. That's why I told you all of this. While you go through the motions, you make the effort, you go for the resolution, because the partial understanding will be enough to save your Iman. Don't undervalue partial understanding. Yes, if you have zero understanding, you'll always be in a crisis. You try to resolve it, you try to learn about it, you try to understand it, definitely, and that I can tell you, definitely you will get after Dhuhr. You will get not just small, you will get a very, almost complete, you can say almost complete understanding. You have to get as complete an understanding as you can, put it that way. I just thought of a third example I'll do for you. If time willing, inshallah. You have to get as complete an understanding as you can. That will save you. And that's all we're mukallaf of. La yukallafullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah Ta'ala will not take us to task, not hold us to account, except to the extent that He Himself, now I'm translating this with commentary to understand it, that He Himself has given you wus'at. That wus'at came from Him also, right? So whatever ability of understanding, learning, knowledge, access to all of them Allah Ta'ala has endowed you with, when you max it out, you will experience that Allah Ta'ala will give you sukoon in your heart about this matter, even though you don't understand it. That's a myth. Again, that's the secular-based approach, that sukoon only comes from complete rational dissection and understanding and analysis. Sukoon comes from Allah. But the sukoon will come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you try your best and try your hardest. So the resolution will come from a sukoon that comes from Him, not from an understanding that comes from you. But your trying for that understanding will invite and attract the sukoon that comes from Him. And that's what I'm going to try to show you. Now, this is not going to happen, the sukoon is not going to happen instantly. Because I will what we say in English, I'm going to open up a big can of worms. And I won't be able to put this as a khatarnak cheese. Once I take the lid off, I won't be able to put the lid back on. It might even disturb you people. It might even disturb you for a few more days. But I hopefully, hopefully, you will be able to see this, that even a partial understanding is sufficient. All right? A partial understanding is sufficient. And that's really the way I would, that's the approach I offer you to what I call the hard cases. All right? And so we end over here, because, so just to go back and show you, if we go all the way back to slide number 2. So slide number 2. Slide number 2. Slide number 2. Today's schedule. All the way, yeah, right before this. That's it. Today's schedule? Yeah. Okay, maybe you should add numbers to the slides, right? Okay. So, 1:15 to 1:45 p.m. is Dhuhr Salah break, all right? There are 2 or 3 toilets, 2 or 3 toilets downstairs. I'm addressing the men right now. So for the men, there are 2 or 3 toilets downstairs. Otherwise, you can, if you need to use the toilet, you can use it in the masjid. We will all pray Dhuhr Salah in the masjid, which is a short walk from here. Those of you who are familiar, you can lead those who don't know. There are enough old faces here that I can see who know how to walk to the masjid. You can just sort of follow the crowd behavior in matters like this. All right? And then you'll come back around 1:45 or 1:50. And then there is supposed to be some very light sandwich type lunch available for you, whether to purchase or I don't even know, or whether to give you for free. I have no idea about that. And you will eat as little of that as you need in order to last the afternoon. Because if you overeat, that will, and those of you who remember last year I told you this, the more you eat, the less you will understand, and the more sleepy you will be in the afternoon session. So you will eat as little as you humanly can, right? And then a little bit more, and then 2:15 we will start. Okay, so now you know the morning schedule also, because I'm very fair to those who like to be punctual. I will start at 11:15 a.m. And those who don't like to be punctual, 11 a.m. Nice, 11 a.m. Desi time and 11:15 a.m. my time. All right? So it's up to you now. If you're a person who comes on the dot, you don't have to come before 11:15 a.m. unless you want a good seat, right? And if you don't come on the dot, tell yourself it starts at 11 a.m. All right, and the online listeners also, because they should also know that if you need to only log in at 11:15, I won't start speaking before 11:15. I will try my best to start at 2:15 after the break, so that's another reason I want you to eat a little bit less, so that you actually don't spend so much time on that. All right? And normally I take what I had normally wanted to do, not normally, what I'd wanted to do today was the last 15 minutes of each session would be some type of Q&A on that session, and the last 15 minutes overall, which I have 4:15 to 4:30, I could even open it up to a more general discussion and interaction, maybe not necessarily on the sessions that day. But let's see, because we have a lot of material, and I think the cases I discussed with you after Zohar themselves will raise so many questions that unlikely that you will have any off-topic questions today, because you will have a lot of on-topic questions. All right? And the last thing to tell you is that 4:45 is Asr Salah, so we end at 4:30. 4:45 is Asr. Now this is not on the schedule because this is optional for you. For me, I will come back after Asr and sit here, and from Asr to Maghrib I will sit here also, so that anybody who wants to have any further discussion interaction with me can do that from Asr to Maghrib. Here we ask the people who have been with us longer and are older students or more senior students or more formal students, they should give the newcomers a chance to have that interaction with me between Asr to Maghrib. All right? And that is all the explanation I want to give you. So now we just go immediately straight to the masjid. For the women, there is all your facilities are downstairs itself for wudu and prayer. Everything you will do downstairs, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Wa akhir dana. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. क्यों हो गए आपके जो पीछे बैठे मैंने कहा आपकी तरक्की हो गए आप पहले वो पीछे बैठे डॉक्टर साहब इनको बंद करने पे अच्छा लोग को बुलाने पर दोनों दरवाजे को बंद कर I think close the doors send the people in who want to sit and then close the doors okay so you go back to slide 17 one before this just one before this right okay Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallam. So I was saying there were going to sometimes be some hard cases which you might not be able to understand. In my 24 years of studying Islam, there's never been anything that I've come across that I could not find explanations of ulama for it. There have been times when I had a question about a verse of Quran, not a question like a doubt kit, but just wanted more information about one aspect of a verse. Maybe the first tafsir didn't have it, second didn't have it, third didn't have it, but sure enough, sooner or later I would find some mufassir who talked about that aspect and more. Same thing in hadith. If I ever wondered something, some more clarification, explanation about a hadith, after searching, sure enough I found one muhaddith who had talked about that aspect and more. And same with any mas'ala, legal issue in Sharia, I would search and find that there were some jurists who talked about that issue and more. So it's never happened to me that I've never found an explanation. Alright? Yes, definitely that can happen, that you might find some explanations more satisfying. You might find some explanations less satisfying. Alright? But one can always get, at least like I told you, a very significant, if not necessarily absolutely complete understanding about the matter. A second principle that occurred to me right now during the break, which did not occur to me before I adjourned, is that you should only give an answer to someone who has the question. And if somebody doesn't have the question, then you should not give them the answer, because by giving them the answer without them having the question, the answer itself will create a question, because they're one step behind you. So if there's a question, then the answer is the answer to the question. If there's no question, you give the answer, it becomes a question for them. And some people say even that only give, I'm not 100% on that position, but some people say only give water to those who are thirsty. Only impart knowledge to those who seek it. Obviously you are sitting, or whoever's listening, you came to seek it, but about any particular matter, right? And then Maulana Ruhul Ramtai has a beautiful poem which I use for many reasons in many ways because I love it so much. He said that water is thirsty for the one who thirsts for it. Water is thirsty for the one who thirsts for it. This can be used for knowledge, this is used for zikr, this can be used, he was using it for his relationship with Shamsid Tabriz, Rahmatullahi, Shaykh, student relationship, Ustaz, Shagird, Ustaz, student relationship, many ways that a person can use this, understand this poem of his. Alright? So, and then also during the break I was thinking of actually, there's quite a few hard cases, there's not even just one or two or three. So one could make a selection from them, and perhaps it would not be a good idea to bring you people today to the hardest case I've ever encountered in 24 years. If you come to me after 24 years, then I'll share with you the hardest case I've ever encountered in 24 years. Because being super hard for me will mean way beyond. For most of you, Allahu Alam, maybe some of you could do better at it, but that will be when you if any one of you ever bring me that question. I will list for you a whole bunch of cases that some people find hard, and some I won't even comment about. Some I will comment on a little bit. Okay? So let's take some examples of these hard cases. I'm going to start easier and build our way up. One example that sometimes people have is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Quran that Nabi Nuh alayhi salam lived for 950 years. Now, on first glance, for people like you and me, it's fine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can say anything, whatever He says, we believe it. But when you're doing dawah or you're meeting somebody who is from a different faith or from a secular perspective or again from a scientific perspective, who believes that human beings can never ever live more than 120 years old, and they are encountering the verse, and they have a question about it. So how can you help them reach that resolution? So one general principle I'm going to give you is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran in many places, multiple times, Huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, that He has power over each and every single thing. Now, these people who believe in comic books and science fiction, fantasy novels and movies, so if they have a Superman to itna to maybe janta, right? There's a lot, but I grew up in America, so I know who Superman is. I mean, who people think he is, the mythological figure of Superman. The Superman has superpowers. So if you were to imagine that I live in a universe in which Superman is real, then you would say, yes, a man can fly. Because you live in a universe, you're imagining for a moment that you live in a universe where Superman is real. You can say, yes, there's a man who can move a mountain, there's a man who can fly to other galaxies, right? Because in that universe, Superman is real. Our Iman teaches us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Haq, He is real. And remember, this is why I told you in the beginning, that faith-based approach is to believe in the existence of Allah Ta'ala and His attributes. Remember? I said to believe in Allah Ta'ala as He has described Himself to be. So if there is a being who is superpower, all-powerful, ala kulli shayin qadir, you don't think He can make one human being live 950 years? Of course He can. Yes, if you don't believe that that being is ala kulli shayin qadir, and you only believe in science, then yes, you will have this dilemma. Then a person will say, okay, fine, but how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do it? Allahu alam. Maybe the same cryogenics that people are trying to discover, the atheists who want to live forever, who are so worried about dying, maybe whatever they're trying to discover, Allah Ta'ala already knows that, and He did that for Nabi Nuh alayhi salam living. Maybe Allah Ta'ala if you want to speak to them on their terms, right? Put him in some type of some stasis in his metabolism. Allahu alam. Eventually you will read something that if you told a biologist that if this is possible, he said, yes, if this is possible, a person could live for 950 years. But my Allah Ta'ala can make anything possible. Allah Ta'ala can make anything possible. Still, that's one level of answer. Another level of answer is Allah Ta'ala can do it without asbab. This is very important. Don't accept science as a necessity. Science is not necessary to understand because Allah Ta'ala is ala kulli shayin qadir. He can make the fire cold for Nabi Ibrahim as-salam by negating its thermal energy or simply by kun fayakun without any scientific means, scientific process because he's ala kulli shay'in qadir, right? Still, if a person insists, then no, I don't understand. How could a person live 950 years? How can a person live 950 years? And what I also told you is that they should not abandon their faith. In other words, do you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Nuh alayhi salam lived for 950 years? Is this the reason why you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Nuh alayhi salam lived for 950 years, that now you're not 100% sure could he live for 950 years, so you're not 100% sure Allah Ta'ala exists? So the answer anybody would say, no, I don't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala long before I found out about this ayah, right? Similar is the hadith about the height of Nabi Adam alayhi salam, which is, I can't remember how many cubits or meters or feet it translated to in English, but it's much more beyond any human being, the height that any human, it would be giant-sized, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, right? Interestingly, another way you can work on this, whether for yourself or for a person, is that there is a notion of miracles, whether you call it mu'jizat or even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's own miraculous power of creation, such as the creation of Nabi Adam alayhi salam himself without any sabab min al-asbab, without any cause. And you see, anybody who can believe that will never be shaken up by the theory of human evolution. But if somebody thinks that no, everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does must be done through some sabab, then they might be shaken up by the theory of evolution, because then what is the sabab of the creation of Adam alayhi salam? So it's very important to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He is, and that He is all powerful, and He does things without needing any asbab. And yes, many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to use asbab to do things, which is the birth of every other human being except for Adam alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam. Other than that, every single other one, 99.9999999%, were born and created through asbab, through causes and means. All right. Then there are sometimes some very particular women's issues. And sometimes only women have questions about them. Sometimes a man may have a question about it. So one of the questions that women very famously often have is that why is a man allowed to marry 4 wives and a woman is not allowed to marry 4 husbands, right? And now, alhamdulillah, I've never met any man or woman who that made them question their belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they're questioning an Islamic teaching. That's what I'm trying to talk about, right? So, okay. So when you open it up and unpack it, so you ask them, okay, why are you questioning this? It's not because they doubt the authenticity of Quran. It's not because they doubt the authority of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's that social reality thing, which we had put at some other slide on the bottom, that for them, their experience of social reality, their own personal emotions, is that such a thing should not happen. Now this opens up another thing, is that it's natural that a person wants that whatever they think is good and right, obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would also think that to be good and right. So if you have a person, man or woman, who personally thinks that a man should only have 1 wife, and then they discover, or they knew, or they start to think about this or focus on this, that Allah ta'ala, His view is different, His position is different than what my position is. So that creates a little bit of a misalignment, right? And that can also then create an awkwardness, all right? So what happens now, I want to use this as an example. I'm not going to discuss that issue directly. I'm just using that case to address some highlights for you. And that is that, first of all, in our deen, there are some things that are permission and there are some things that are prescription. Always remember this. There are some things that are permission and there are some things that are prescription. For example, let's say any one of you is a doctor, all right? It's permissible in Sharia for you to renounce your medical practice and drive a rickshaw in Karachi. It's permissible. You wouldn't be doing anything haram, right? But nobody would advise you to do that. And if nobody would prescribe that course of activity to you. In fact, were you to do it, even though it's permissible, irrespective of the fact that it's absolutely permissible, every one of your friends, parents, family will tell you you're crazy, and why are you abandoning your medical profession to drive a rickshaw, right? So what does that mean? It has absolutely nothing to do with whether it's permissible or not. It is permissible. The question is whether you're going to do it or not. Now, the tone and tenor, and a lot of this has to do with the Arabic, is called sigha, the particular conjugal form and grammatical way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says things in Quran and blesses the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say things in hadith. There are some things that are commands, right? That's called amr. They're fard. Then there's some things that are recommendations, mustahab, mandub, right? These two things, commands and recommendations, are prescriptions. You're being prescribed, enjoined, invited, encouraged to do those activities. Then there's another type of language in Quran, and also in the words of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is mere permission, dun al-istihbab. And it's a permission that is empty of all recommendation, empty of all obligation, empty of all prescription. It's merely permission. So I'll give you a classic example of that is divorce. Now, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not made divorce permissible, then all of us would have thought that divorce would have been haram, right? And then if a person got married, there would be, let's say, no exit at all. Now, I'll introduce another element. What happens, especially in these things that are only at the level of permission, not at the level of recommendation or obligation, so no level of prescription. There's a lot of abuse of the things that are at this level. So I think all of you would know out there in social reality, there's a lot of abuse of divorce, which means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah knows best what He wants and what He knows, but in all likelihood, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not want that husband and wife to get divorced, but they chose to get divorced anyway. Now what does it mean? In that case, actually it would have been the recommendation of deen to stay together. So there are many things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned about this in Quran, right? And many things the Prophet has said in Hadith. The most famous is that the abghaz, the most detestable thing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of the permissible things is divorce. So that's almost like you can say a disincentive, the opposite of recommendation, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Quran outlines a whole process that you should try sulah, you should try verbally reprimanding, you should try other ways of chastising, you should separate the beds, you should have third-party arbitration, then you should only give just one divorce and then wait, maybe you might do ruju, you might patch up, let some time pass, then you give a second one, then again let some time, and ultimately, finally, only after exhausting every single possibility should you then go for the final divorce, right? Which is not necessarily even by giving 3, even if you give 1 and you let the whole iddat pass, then also becomes final if you give a simple plain, what's called talaq raji. So that's the prescribed way of doing it. If somebody says, what if I give 3 talaqs in one shot? Permissible, but not prescribed. It wasn't the way you were supposed to do it. But it is, Allah Ta'ala has created that permission. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created that possibility. Alright? So many times there are things at the level of permission that people abuse. They do improperly. Now, if somebody does something improperly, it doesn't mean it becomes impermissible. Impermissible is something else, that's called haram. Improper is something else. Okay? So there are many people who divorce improperly. There are many people who do multiple marriages improperly. And 99% of the questions that are raised on these things is because of improper use. It's very rare that if I was to give somebody a proper case, if somebody would raise a question. So let's take the same 2 examples. So if I told somebody, look, that there are 2 people and they genuinely, sincerely thought that they were marrying one another for the sake of deen, and after they got married, and it wasn't love, well, what do you call them? In Pakistan, love these things, love marriage versus arranged marriage, right? आपकी भी इस्तिलाहत है ना, आप एक लफ्ज़ में पूरे हकीकत को बांध लेते हैं, huh? All right, yeah, you're okay. All right, so they say, no, it wasn't a love marriage, it was an arranged marriage, it was arranged for the sake of deen, and we tried to make it work, and we kept trying, this, that, even once there was a divorce, and we patched up. Finally, we decided to part ways, right? But we're fine with each other, there was no battle over custody, no ill will, we parted with ihsan. So I think if this situation was presented in front of anyone, they wouldn't have an objection to it, because it was something that Allah Ta'ala gave permission to do, and it was done properly. As opposed to, if it turns out the husband got angry one night and he gave 3 talaqs altogether, people will object to that. Why? Because fine, it's something Allah Ta'ala gave permission to do, but it was done improperly. If there's a person similarly, like for example, if you, just to use, it's a very stereotypical thing what I'm about to do right now, but you take the example of the rich Saudi who has 2 wives, they have the same 2 houses, they have the same 2 cars, they have the same monetary income. He says one of them was divorced or one of them was a widower. She was my cousin, right? I treat them both well. I'm doing the best I can do. Most people would say, okay, nobody's ever given me an objection to that, right? Because that was something Allah Ta'ala gave permission for and something that He did properly, right? The person who will object to that is the first wife, because that's an emotional issue for her. Now, what does she want? Now, I'm going to be very blunt about this, right? What she wanted was that her husband should be only hers. That is an ideal. Now, let me use some more words. That is an ideal. And that's something that's preferred, and Allah Ta'ala entitles her to that feeling of preference. It doesn't mean Shreya is negating that. Allah Ta'ala fully, the deen of Islam, entitles her to have that feeling that this is what I would have preferred, right? That my husband would only marry me. And she's fully entitled for her whole life to keep that as a preference. The permission in Quran does not mean she has to forego her personal preference, right? And so much so that the jurists have even said that if a woman, once she contracts her nikah, she can insert any shart, any condition that is not repugnant to Sharia, that is not against Sharia, and that is mutually agreed upon by two parties. And if she puts that condition in her nikah, that my husband will never marry again, and the husband agrees to that condition, well, she has locked him in, she has gotten him contractually to waive the permission that Allah Ta'ala gave him. Allah Ta'ala has given people that right. You can waive your rights, you can waive your permissions. Why? So she could guarantee what she felt was her ideal or her preference. Many of you are thinking, shukr hai, mere nikah se pehle mere ghar wale ne ye guftagu nahi suni. Right? Yes. That's also there in Sharia. Do you see what I'm saying? There are ways. There are paths. If a person feels so insistent about a preference, is so committed to an ideal, there are ways that you can secure that ideal and preference for yourself. Right? That's possible also. All right? So, you see, there are many different ways to tackle something. Now, the mistake that people make is they only look at the hard case, which was the problematic one, as opposed to looking in theory why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that in Quran, or why did the Prophet say in the Hadith, and how there may have been many applications of this theory also that were problem-free, that will only look at the problematic application. If you do that in anything in life, there's nothing, you can't spare anything. I'll give you an example. There are people who go to coeducation, and because they went to coeducation, they end up in zina. I guarantee you this is the case, because I have real live data on this matter, right? Real data cases of people who came to me. Okay? Now what does that mean? That wasn't the reason they went to school. That wasn't the reason they went to university. That wasn't the ideal way to do it. That wasn't the preferred way to do it. That wasn't the prescribed way to do it. But yes, that environment created a certain promiscuity, certain permissibility, and created the possibility for them to do that, right? So the problem was with their choice. The problem was their choice of the improper way of doing things, as opposed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating that possibility. This I'm sort of leading up to, which is the afternoon session, which is the free will and predestination. So I gave you a few examples. Sometimes people have questions about a verse of Quran or a hadith because it doesn't resonate with science, scientific understanding. Sometimes people have a question because it doesn't, whatever incident they observed in social reality doesn't resonate with their own personal preferences. I'll give you another example. So there are a couple of things which are very difficult. So now let me give you an example of a very difficult case. Going to hell forever. This is a very difficult thing, right? You know, I'll give you an example. I have first cousins who are Hindu in India, right? So I come from a mixed Muslim-Hindu family. Majority Muslim, but there's one branch, two odd branches that are Hindu, right? Now obviously I have met a couple of those first cousins in my life, right? Now, if I go to my purely academic, scholarly understanding of Islam, pretty much I know very well that the position of the overwhelming majority of theologians is, unless Allah Ta'ala gives them hidayah for iman and tawfiq of tawbah, and specifically because I know they actually do some Hindu practices and beliefs, they're going to go to hell forever, right? Now this is a very difficult thing for people, right? Because now it's personal, because it's my cousin, right? For some people, mashallah, they're better than me. It's difficult for any human being, just because their mashallah is so humanistic, right? They just can't accept the notion that any human being would go to hell forever. So okay, you can go for some time, there should be some period. Then this opens up a whole series of questions, right? Then they start thinking, and then, which is a very dangerous, again, I'm not, I'm just describing, I'm not prescribing, but I'm describing to you the type of thoughts that people have, right? They even start thinking, which is extremely dangerous. They start thinking, they don't say it, they think, if I were Allah, I wouldn't put that person in hell forever. They start thinking like that, They start thinking like that. So then they don't understand, right? First of all, this sentence is never going to lead anywhere positive, if I were Allah. Na'uzubillah minash shaitanir rajeem. You can't think like that, It's just like what I did for you before. Now, on that, all of you were saying, when I said the secular says, if the Prophet ﷺ was alive, you were all nodding, yeah, that's how they talk, and that was wrong. But this is also wrong, right? This is also wrong. Or, one step down, if it were up to me, so not if I was, Allah is Allah, I can never be Allah. If it were up to me, I wouldn't put that person in hellfire. Well, if it were up to you, it's not up to you. Liman al-mulkul yawm, lillahi al-wahid al-qahhar. Allah Ta'ala will have it proclaimed on the day of judgment, to whom belongs the dominion and rule and sovereignty on that day, only and only to Allah al-wahid, that one Allah Ta'ala, al-qahhar, that dominating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't even think like that if it were up to me, right? But still, this is a big thing for people. They say, okay, fine, I accept it, I believe it, I know what you're saying, but it disturbs me. So then, this itself disturbs them. The fact that something about my deen disturbs me, that itself is disturbing me, right? So you keep coming back on this issue. There was one scholar, you find it's amazing. Remember I was mentioning to Ibn Taymiyyah, and Ibn Taymiyyah has a few of his departures. One of his departures, though, contemporary Salafis have tried their level best to suppress this, hide this, not print it, and never let it get translated, but it's clear cut in his works. And the biggest exposition of this was then once somebody in England did a PhD on this and actually wrote the whole thing up and then printed it, right? One of Ibn Taymiyyah's positions is that hell won't be forever. That's one of his positions, one of his tafarrudat, one of his unique, let's say, departures from the rest of Islamic scholarly tradition. Now, like I told you, remember the workshop? There's no basis for this position. Because the workshop, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used this word in Quran, khulud. Khulud means dwell therein forever, right? They will be there forever, right? And it's not once or twice or 3 times, it's dozens and dozens of clear-cut, what are called muhkam. Muhkam means the absolute clear-cut, definitive, straight-up, unambiguous ayat of Quran, right? So we know that for sure. Now I used to wonder, and nobody can answer this question, not me, no one. But I wonder, why did Ibn Taymiyyah come up with this position? And the reason I'm showing you this is I'm not trying to malign him. I'm trying to show you that even such a great scholar like him could not reconcile this matter, the hard cases, right? So what are you guys, right? For him, it was a hard case, and he just couldn't do it, so he ended up abandoning it. That's not the right way to go. That's not the right course of action to pursue, right? But it also shows you that people have thought about this, and there have been humanists. You don't have to be a secular, an atheist, or non-liberal in the bad sense or non-practicing sense to be humanist. The great classical and Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah was extremely hardcore, strict, conservative, orthodox. We're not talking about anybody who's lacks in their deen. Hardcore knowledge, hardcore practice, solid, muttaqi, salih, waliullah, alim ad-din, right? You understand? But the hard cases are very hard. The deeper you go, the harder they get. The deeper you go, there's nothing. The deeper you go, the harder. They don't get any easier. And if you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, it can just get harder and harder and harder. So, what's the solution? One solution is what I call the easy exit. The easy exit is that, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not, it's not going to be up to me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to ask me who goes to Jahannam and for how long. Because that's also not everybody goes forever. There are some who will go and will be taken out, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to ask me who goes in and for how long. On this earth, I don't actually have to decide that. That's also something important. This is another way of saying it's not necessary for you to actively adopt this theological position that all non-Muslims are going to hell. You don't have to think like that even. You just have to think, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to send whoever He wants to Jahannam. I don't have to necessarily take an absolute statement like that. All right? You don't know, and we don't know. All right? Third is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone will make this decision. And fourth, now remember, we believe in Allah Ta'ala's attributes, and Allah Ta'ala is all merciful and all just. You see, in this world, if I told you that there's a judge, and I somehow convinced you that He is an absolutely true, just judge, then if you had a case coming in front of Him, you would be relaxed. You'll say, okay, now that I know He is just, then I have nothing to worry about, right? And that would still, there'd be some margin of error because you're talking about a human being, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolutely all just. So that means and actually even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to reinforce this, has even said literally word for word in Quran that Allah ta'ala will not do zulm on anyone on that day. No zulm will be done, nobody will be allowed to do zulm, no zulm will be done unto them. This comes many times in Quran. So that's all we know, right? Now if our mind thinks it would be unjust to put X, Y, Z person in Jahannam, it doesn't matter because Allah Ta'ala truly understands justice and me and you don't. So that's the next thing. One is to understand Allah Ta'ala's attributes, the perfection of His knowledge, the perfection of His mercy, the perfection of His justice, and to be honest about our own attributes. Is my knowledge is imperfect. Whatever I think is mercy, I have an imperfect understanding of that. What I think to be justice, that is also imperfect, right? I'm imperfect. Allah Ta'ala is perfect, all right? So this is an aspect of submission. Now again, like I told you, this is a partial understanding. It's not like I said, well, just, it will happen. No, it's a new way to look at it. Before, the looking at it was, okay, my first cousin who's Hindu is going to go to Jahannam forever. There's a new way, now there's a new way of looking at it. My first cousin who's Hindu, if he dies like that, he will stand in front of the all perfect, all beautiful, all noble, all merciful, all just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah ta'ala will perfectly decide about that person. That's more acceptable. That's fine, right? So the way you understand it, the way you express it, the way you describe it is what makes it more palatable. So it takes us away. You have to make it, generalize it, you have to abstract it. It takes us away from the particular emotional or personal attachment that might sometimes be there. All right? So this is an example also of a very hard case, which is the aspect of Jahannam, right? And I would tell you, if you don't find that to be a hard case, then you need to work on your spirituality. Yeah. In fact, those of you who were there in the Sound Institute last week, one of my teachers came and he was talking about Quran, and he made a very interesting point that, amongst the many, many proofs that the Quran could not have been the word of the Prophet ﷺ, but can only be revealed divine speech, he said that the descriptions of Jahannam in the Quran are so extreme and so intense. Sayyidina Rasulullah himself could never have come up with this. In fact, no human being would have been able to come up with such a description of Jahannam, right? So it was yet another, we've heard so many different proofs from ulama about what we call ijaz al-Quran, inimitability of Quran, but this was another ajib from another angle. And when he was saying it, I was saying it's true, Only the being who created Jahannam could write about Jahannam like that. There's no way any human being could ever think of describing a place like Jahannam. It's beyond the imagination of a human being, right? And when you realize that it is beyond our humanity to understand the eternality of hell. So if it's beyond our humanity, not beyond our mind or my learning or mind, it's beyond our humanity to understand it. So you have to leave those things up entirely in the realm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the way to reconcile this is, Allah, like I told you before, Allah ta'ala also has taken this entirely in His realm. Who goes to Jannah, who goes to Jahannam, me and you have no knowledge about that. We will make no decision about that. We have no role in that whatsoever. All right? On that day, in this world, we can try to dawah, to try to guide people away from Jahannam, to guide them towards the Jannah. But on that day, we have no knowledge, no decision-making power whatsoever. All right? So it is entirely out of our realm, and Allah Ta'ala has kept it entirely in His realm. If it had been partially even in our realm, then yes, it would be an extreme tension for us. Extreme source of tension that partly I need, at some level, even to some extent, if we had to make that decision. So that is also one aspect of the resolution. So now I'm going to take this case If you move to slide number 18, and I'm going to flesh this one case out in detail. And then all these things I just told you right now, you're going to see all of this in this issue of free will and predestination. I pick this particular one to do in detail because Allahu Alam, but from what I saw, I mean specifically I'm talking about the English educated university students or graduates crowd, ask me this question a lot. And somehow this seems to be the first victory that the atheist often makes on the Muslim's heart. That you don't have any free will anyway, and so then what's the point? Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows whether you're going to Jannat or Jahannam already, so what's the point? Or you were born in a Muslim family and so was born in a Hindu family, so it's not fair. You know, if you had been born in their family, you would have been Hindu. If he had been born in your family, he would have been Muslim, so what's the point? And like I told you, it's not just the first thing that's frequently asked to me, and one of the first things that I find that Muslims start getting weakened against atheists, I've also seen it's one of the first things, the first attacks the atheists use. And which you say another banda ko la jawab kar dete hain. And you never, and you need to understand how to be. I mean, you might not give you the jawab, but you need to be more strong in being la jawab, right? Because your jawab, I gave you a jawab, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I'm going to show you some things now. We're going to open this up a little bit for you. So if you move now to the next slide, slide number 19. You can show a bit more than that. Yeah. All right, so let me explain a little bit before I go to this particular ayah. First, you have to understand the Islamic concept of humanity. Out of all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's vast creation, human beings are unique. Human beings and the jinn, technically speaking, humanity and the jinn are unique. They're exceptions to his entire creation. And the exceptions are what you have in the second bullet point, is that humanity and jinn have been given the freedom to disbelieve and have been given the freedom to disobey. There is no other creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created that can disobey him. The sun cannot disobey him, the moon cannot disobey him, the earth cannot disobey him, a cat cannot disobey him, a whale cannot disobey him, a far-off galaxy, star cannot disobey him, a speck of dust cannot disobey him. There is no creation that can disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except the human and the jinn. There's no creation that can choose to adopt disbelief except the human and the jinn. A cow cannot disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A rock cannot disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A planet cannot disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mentioned in Quran about the mountains, about the sun, about the stars, all in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. So this is a unique thing. Now, I'm going to cast aside the jinn because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't given us too much information in Quran or Hadith about the jinn. And the second reason is that none of us are jinn. All right? No matter what, mashallah, especially in Pakistan, some people think, that mere andar jinn aa gaya hai, right? So I was thinking, okay, if I was a jinn and I could enter a human being, I wouldn't enter you, all right? So I need to talk to this jinn. I don't need to counsel you. I need to counsel this jinn that what's the matter with you? You have the ability to enter a human being and you pick this person, right? If I was a jinn, I'd enter, I don't know who I would enter, but it would be somebody, all right? Kya kare, right? So we're going to cast aside the jinn. All right? Humanity, because we have more information about it, and this is our duty. Learning and scholarship, we have to learn about who we are and why Allah Ta'ala created us and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. All right? So insan definitely, and you can again use social reality for that, you can meet people who freely disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and freely disobey in Him and actually fight for that freedom. All right? And defend that freedom. So there's no denying this empirically either. So all of empiricism, rationality, all of it also will accept this point. There are people who freely disbelieve and freely disobey. All right. So the question is, out of all of His creation, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this exception? Because out of all of His creation, Allah ta'ala plans to make an exception in the akhirah, is that humanity will live forever. There's no other creation like that. They are mentioned that Allah ta'ala will make the dog of Ashab Kahf live forever. There are a few exceptions from some other elements of creation. But as a race, as a species, as an entire genus of creation, it's only insan and jinn, but we don't know 100% everything about the jinn. All right? So that's an exception. No other. And if you think about it rationally, living eternally, that should only be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum. It only befits Him. We are mortal creatures. Why should we live forever? So there's a reason. The reason is this freedom. So actually, free will is not something against the teaching of Islam. The whole tension between free will and predestination is the crux of Islam. It's the focal point of Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this freedom. Because if you freely believe and you freely obey, that has value. And that has so much value to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He will make such a person live forever in Jannah. And similarly, if you freely disbelieve and freely disobey, and that's the meaning of La ikraha fid din. If you freely disbelieve and freely disobey, that has so much evil. The greatest evil, greater than the evil of murder, greater than the evil of any, whatever other thing you can think of, the greatest evil is to deny the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is to deny the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright? Okay. So it's one verse where you can understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran al-Kareem, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. That whomsoever wants, let them adopt the path of Iman, and whomsoever wants, let them deny. Okay? Literally means deny, disbelieve, but let them deny. Alright? So this ayah itself, فَمَنْ شَاءَ, it's will. It's literally free will. It's will, and the freedom to will, Allah Ta'ala is giving it in this verse. Sha'a indicates that there's will, and the freedom to exercise that will on this critical issue of Iman or Kufr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving that freedom Himself in Quran. And this verse, and then the other one, La ikraha fid din. Alright? So the fact that this freedom exists is part of Quran. Don't think the free will question came from outside of Islam. It's coming from inside the workshop. It's already there. Okay, then if you move to the next slide, which is slide number 20. And if you just show the whole thing, so framing the question. It's very important that you understand that this whole question of free will and predestination comes from within the Islamic tradition. It's not a question that the philosophers or the atheists are levying against us. Why? Because the existence of free will comes from within the tradition, and the existence of taqdeer also comes from within the tradition. The simplest way you can understand this is the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. So the aqidah about the sifat is that Allah ta'ala, just like He has always existed in His zat, in His essence, He has always existed in His sifat. They say in very simple Arabic, Huwa al-an kama kan. He exists now as He always has. He's always been al-alim. His sifat of ilm and qudrat, absolute knowledge and absolute power. It's there. So our own deen teaches us that human beings have free will and complete absolute free will. And our own deen teaches us that Allah Ta'ala has the absolute knowledge of what you're going to do. It's just not a question coming from without. You don't need any philosophy from outside to raise the question. Alright? It's very important to frame the question from within. Okay? Now let's look at this a little bit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge. This is where it gets a little bit technical. Now, when me and you think about knowledge, we divide our knowledge into knowledge of the past, knowledge of the present, and knowledge of the future. Alright? But you have to understand, now go back to Huwa al-an kama kan. Allah Ta'ala exists now as He always has. So another thing they say in Arabic, La makana lahu, la zamana lahu. There is no space and no time. Space is also creation and time is also creation. So Allah Ta'ala created time itself and the passing of time. However you want, whatever you want to go, all Einsteinian, time dilation, and whatever you want to say, it's all created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright? Allah Ta'ala exists as a timeless being, as He always has and always will before He even created time. Time is a mere frame of reference for us mortals. And when Allah Ta'ala, out of His power, decrees for us to live forever, then also you won't really speak about linear time. Alright? That's a frame of reference. So for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no such thing as past, present, and future. The simplest way we would explain this when if we were to use a board, is if I was to take a board and, let's see, I can just do an ishara. If I were to take a black board, let's say there was a board, and I drew 2 lines to make 3 parts. I said, this is your past, everything. Just imagine that somebody could write down everything that happened to you before. Present, which is technically there's no such thing because the present, every moment is fleeting. But let's say you define present as today. So everything that happens and will happen to you today. And then third part of the board is future. Every single thing that will ever happen to you between now and you die, and even after you are resurrected on the day of judgment. I'll go further. Everything you will do in Jannah, inshallah. Every Sahabi you will meet, the first words you will say to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first words you will say to Nabi Isa alayhi salam, nahi samjhe. Think your future is a bit beyond my next job, next degree. Samajh gaye? Huh? How you will feel when you meet Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. How you will do hamd of Allah Ta'ala, with which words when Allah Ta'ala inshallah shows you your dwelling and residence in Jannah. You understand? That's all there. Let's say I write all that down. Then it's on one board, right? Just like you could see the whole board in one glance, Allah Ta'ala can see and know everything in less than a glance. That's what it means. There's no past, present, future for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to even speak like that Allah Ta'ala knows my future, it's a nonsensical statement. Because your future is not the future for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's a timeless being. There's no difference between past, present, future. In fact, if anything, the way I told you, there's no real present for us. Everything is past or future because, right, this is what they teach you in calculus. You see, the present is, what is the present? 1 minute? You say, no, it's 1 second. No, it's 1 millisecond. You keep dividing it until you get closer to 0. So calculus teaches you the limit of x as it approaches 0 is 0. You just treat it as 0. That means there's no present. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the being with everything for Him, so to speak. Even this is not even technically correct. But from a frame of reference, there's no past. Everything is a present. It's all still. It's all the same for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That itself is an amazing thing about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That He knows what you do today, and He knows, inshallah, those things I told you, that if Allah ta'ala accepts us with His mercy and gives us more hidayah and tawfiq to do amal and tawfiq to make tawbah of sins, and still only and because of His mercy on His day of judgment He puts us in Jannah, He also knows right now everything you'll do in Jannah. I mean, that's quite an amazing thing. Just imagine if some person is going to Jannah, but that morning he misses his Fajr Salah. So Allah Ta'ala is knowing simultaneously that this person is missing Fajr and also is going to be doing all these things in Jannah. This is only the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what it means to be Al-Halim and Al-Rahim. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be like this. No other being could even handle these two diverse types of knowledge or practice from any person. Alright? Okay. So the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quote unquote knows the future is coming from within the system. Alright. So where does the paradox stand? Now this question comes from outside the Islamic system. And that question is that, okay, now this is unfair, this is unjust, or there's no meaning and value to life if Allah Ta'ala knows what you're going to do. That's not our question. That's somebody else's question. We don't have that problem. Understand that we as Muslims do not have a problem with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knowing everything about us, because we view Him to be Al-Alim, Al-Khabir, Al-Basir, As-Samir, so many different aspects to us. We have no problem with that. From somebody outside, they have this question. Then how can He know and be aware and see and hear everything? And you think you're doing it of your own free will. So this is the part that comes from outside. All right? Okay. Now answer to this question. Because what they do is they try to take it to, what you can go to the next slide. I think we've done this one, slide number 21. So just show the first line, first two lines there, best knowledge, and that's fine, the way you have it. So framing the paradox, that's what they do. They try to suggest, paradox means that this is illogical. It's not possible that both things are there, that you have free will and Allah Ta'ala has the knowledge. You have free will and Allah Ta'ala has the knowledge. Right? So even from the questioner, there's no claim that you have the knowledge. There's no claim that Allah Ta'ala is doing the actions. It's understood. Now understand clearly. It's understood from both sides, from us and them, that the choosing and the doing we do, and the knowing Allah Ta'ala has. Right? So you choose what you eat, and you eat it, but Allah Ta'ala knew what you were going to eat. Right? So both sides agree on that. So we start with that. The choosing and doing we do, and the knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. Alright? This division is precisely the solution and resolution to the paradox. Because if this division didn't exist, then there would be a paradox. If this division didn't exist, what would it mean? The option one would mean that Allah Ta'ala does the choosing and doing and the knowing. So Allah Ta'ala chooses for you what you eat, and Nauzubillah, and He eats it, and He knows what you're going to eat. So that's not true. Social reality again said, we don't say that. The questioner doesn't say that. Even the questioner says, no, you choose and you do what you do yourself. Right? But that would be a paradox. Then you would say, life has no meaning. Life has no point. Allah Ta'ala chooses everything for me. He does everything for me, and He knows I was going to do it. Yes, that would be nonsensical. That would truly be a paradox. Other option would be, if there wasn't this division, that we knew everything, we had everything, so we do the choosing and the doing, and we know. We know when we're going to die, we know what we're going to eat tomorrow, we know what a person is going to do to us, we know who will be loyal to us, we know who will betray us, we also know. That's number one, also not the case. Nobody makes the claim that we know the future. And number two, if it were the case, then yes, then you could say it's a paradox. Life would have no meaning if you knew what you were going to do in the future. How would you live? You couldn't live a life like that. The first thing is that if you knew where and when you were going to die, you can never survive that knowledge. And then there would be a paradox. For example, if you knew that you were going to deny, Allahu Alam, but if you knew you were going to die on January 1, 2017 in Karachi, so on December 31st, you'd catch a flight to Jeddah, right? That's what you would do if you knew, right? If you had the knowing and the choosing and the doing, so if you had the knowing that you were going to die tomorrow, you would choose to do the action of leaving Karachi today and not being here tomorrow. Then there would be a paradox. What would happen? There'd be a paradox. So the way the paradox is eliminated is through this division that the human has the choosing and doing, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the knowing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no paradox with the division. The paradox exists when there's not a division. All right. So this is these 4 points. Now if you show the rest of the 4 points, these are all the 4 points that I mentioned to you. Knowing and the knowledge, that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The doing and the choosing, in fancy, in their philosophical terms, this is called voluntarism. It's called agency. Simple English is called action. That you were the chooser, you were the doer. All right, you were the agent of your own actions and your own decisions. Okay, then I explained to you the real paradox would be if both were with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or both were with the human being. And the implications of that would truly be illogical. Okay, and then I've already explained to you earlier the timelessness of the divine being, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists as He has always existed, beyond any notion of time, any concept of time. This is one round. There are a few rounds to this question. All right, this is one round. Now move to the next slide. You can show the whole slide, slide number 22. Next question they will say, okay, fine, we accept that. But even the choices that you make and the actions that you do are predetermined. How? So they can't say predetermined by Allah Ta'ala knowing, because you already handled that. So they come up with 2 other reasons. Number one, they will say they're predetermined by your nature. And Allah Ta'ala created your nature, therefore you're bound by your nature, therefore your choices and decisions are predetermined. Nature means, so the cutting edge of this, which is just a theory now, is now in genetics they are trying to search for what they call behavioral genes. Genes that determine, and they use this word determine, genes that determine your behavior. It's not a fact yet, but it's a major area of exploration for them in human genetics, all right? And the notion is that perhaps there may be a gene in you, or gene that makes people more angry. So anybody who has that is going to be angry, and somebody who doesn't have that would not be angry, okay? All right. And even before, let's say they came up with genetics, still they would just generally talk about nature. That, well, you believe because God made you that way. And they were saying, I don't believe because God made me that way. That's how they would talk, right? Okay, that's called nature. So the answer to this is psychology and social reality. For example, obviously within our own system of Islam, but also even outside of Islam, there are not just one or two or few, there's millions of people throughout time who have changed their behavior. There are millions of people who have changed in terms of their personality. For example, if there is a person, so let me give this example, if there's a man who has an anger problem, and because of that anger problem, na'uzubillah, he abuses, physical abuse, domestic battery, physically abuses his wife, right? So now what's going to happen? Are we going to sit that woman down and tell her, well, your husband is predetermined genetically to be angry? No. We will send that husband to anger management therapy. He will be sent to counseling. We have our own way of doing it in Islam. There may be another way that the psychologists do it. You can very well blend and combine the two. And you will find that there are many people who change. And they will say that I used to be angry and I'm not angry anymore. I used to be an alcoholic, I'm not an alcoholic anymore. I used to be this, I used to be that. So the notion that a human being can change, just the possibility of changing, means that it's not predetermined. Because predetermined strictly means, when you're using predetermined to negate free will, means you are trying to negate that there's no possibility of change whatsoever. Only then would it be a paradox. And then it would be unjust that Allah Ta'ala is going to call me, Allah Ta'ala is going to take me to account on the Day of Judgment for the actions I did when I was angry. However, He created me and predetermined my nature to be angry, and it was impossible for me to change. Then you could say Allah Ta'ala is unjust. Na'uzubillah. But that's not the case. In fact, our very deen has a very important branch in it called tazkiyah. Qad aflaha man zakkaha. Allah Ta'ala Himself has said, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Let's put both in there. They're both there. Anger is there, patience is there. Now you have to work on it. There's a process. Both have been put in you. You've been pre-programmed for both, not one. If it was only one, then yes, it's predetermined, it's not fair. You've been programmed for both. And Allah Ta'ala also did that because of the first thing, because of the freedom. The freedom to do good and the freedom to do evil would have no meaning unless Allah Ta'ala put in us the capacity and ability to do both good and evil. Then the freedom has value. So Allah Ta'ala put the capacity, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Then gave us the free will. Then gave us hidayah to guide us towards good. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in a person lawful lust and unlawful lust. He put that capacity in them. Then He gave them the free will. You can look or you can look down. Then He gave them an eye with that ability. Then He gave them the hidayah through Quran and through deen, guiding them towards what is good. And that's beyond justice. Justice would be to give you both and just give you that one line in Quran. Man sha'a fal yu'min wa man sha'a fal yakfur. But that's it. That would have been justice. Allah Ta'ala did more than that. Because out of His mercy, out of His compassion, He also gave us hidayah to tilt the balance and probability in favor of good. In favor of good. But then His justice also demanded, because another question atheists have, that okay, there had to be something, because if it was just Quran and just Anbiya, then the balance would be so tilted that everybody would end up good, and then how could you say there's a choice? So I said, okay, on the one hand, I've got Quran and Anbiya, my whole system of hidayah. On the other hand, I will also create shaitan and put a nafs inside everyone, so there'll also be a system of going astray. That they'll be balanced. To make sure they have that freedom. To make sure they have that freedom. Both things will be there. So internally, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Internally, qalb and nafs. Externally, hidayah, Quran, anbiya, and externally, shaitan. Both sides are there. Why? Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep balancing it? To ensure the freedom. Because the freedom is critical. The freedom is critical. Then remember that other verse I told you. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. This is the wasa. This is the wasa Allah Ta'ala has created. Beyond that, you won't be responsible for. So let's say somebody even says that, no, I've been created with a level of anger that is this high at level 10. With all of tazkiyah, zikr, sunnah, counseling, therapy, I can only bring it down to 2. We say, okay, if what you say is true, Allahu alam, but even if what you say is true, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, you will only be judged on the day of judgment that did you bring it down to 2. Fine, if that's what you say, there's a limit to how much a human being can reform themselves. So if we accept that it's limited, but Allah Ta'ala has already addressed that you will only be judged to the limits of your abilities. So you won't be judged until you bring it down to 0. You will only be judged and Allah will know. I won't know. Maybe I would think you could have brought it down to 0. But let's say you're right. Allah Ta'ala will know that. And will know you could only bring it down to 2. So you just have to bring it down to 2. That's it. So this is some of the answers to their argument about nature. Next argument they give is then about nurture. Well, you were born in the Muslim family and he was born in the Hindu family, right? Which, okay, so I gave you my example. I mean, 99.99% probably it's true. If I was born where my first cousin was born, and he was born right, well, that's definitely true about this way. If I was born where my first cousin was born, probably I would have grown up Hindu. Probably I'd be a Hindu right now, right? Fair enough? Okay. So well, what about that then? Well, that's not fair. Why is it not fair? Because it's not fair. Well, Raj was born in a Hindu family. It's not his fault. He had nothing to do with that. Okay. Now, again, the argument is what? They're trying to lead it to what? That this is unjust and unfair of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. For you to understand this, then I've got to, you can move to the next slide. You can show the first 3 lines. Life on earth, Muslim or non-Muslim, by birth or by choice. All right. So now the question being posed here is all due to nurture. All right. Even before I get to that, the Hindu Muslim, just an example, it could be anything, it could be atheist Muslim. First of all, you should know that nurture means where you were raised, what family you were born in, what century you lived in, who your parents were, who your friends were, etc. Nurture itself is not deterministic, means it does not necessarily 100% determine your behavior. The best example of this is that 2 brothers can turn out totally different. Even though in terms of nurture, same century, same culture, same society, same country, same parents, same family, sometimes same school, sometimes same teachers even, right? And they can turn out totally different. So it's clear that nurture itself is not absolutely deterministic, right? So he goes and searches for this person, and then he finds him. All right, and the whole story about the fish and all of that stuff. Okay. They find each other, and Khizr says, you're not going to be able to last with me. You won't have sabr with me. You won't be able to have patience. He says, no. I will. Right? And then, as you remember, 3 things happen, and in all 3 things, he questions Khizr, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and then after the 3rd, he says, but that's it. هَذَا فَرَاقٌ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنِكَ. This is the separation between you and me. We have to part ways now. What was the 3rd thing? The 3rd thing was that they were passing through a town, and they asked the people of the town to do their ziyafat, help out the traveler with some food or something. And the people refused, which was, again, their permission. Completely permissible to refuse. Completely permissible. They refused. So on the way out, Khidr, he saw that there was this wall that had fallen down. So he engaged in hard manual labor, and he picked up these huge stones of the wall to rebuild that wall. And he told Musa, the Nabi of the time, to do the same thing. Ab Nabi Musa, he did it, and they did re-erect the wall, but he asked him that why? At the least you could have then told them, give us some food in exchange for rebuilding this wall. So then he said, this is the separation. And the reason he gave, why did I rebuild this wall? He said that because there is some money, treasure, inheritance of some youth which is buried here in this ground. And if we had left the wall fallen, then they would have never ever been able to get at their inheritance. So why did you, the Wali of the time and the Nabi of the time, Wali Zaman wa Nabi Zaman, Ajib, the greatest Wali alive and the greatest Nabi alive, why did they do this? So Khizr says, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told me that what? That Abuhuma Saliha, that the father of these two, and some ulama of tafsir say Ab means their forefather, and some say it was 7 generations removed forefather, was Salih. So that person being Salih, transitive good, he's died now, right? Their forefather being Salih had an effect of good that went down, that Allah Ta'ala made the Nabi of the time and the Wali of the time rebuild a wall for the sake of those youngsters. So yes, and somebody did a good deed. Somebody did the greatest good deed. Remember I told you what was the greatest evil? Was kufr. What's the greatest good? Adopting iman. So yes, somebody in our forefathers did this greatest good, that they adopted iman, and yes, that benefits us. And yes, there's somebody who was born in a non-Muslim family, and he did not have, or she did not have any forefather who did that greatest good, and she is not able to benefit from that. Just like, maybe, I don't know most of us don't even know even our financial history, but let's just construct an example. If there were 2 people who in 1900 were at the same level financially, one of them worked hard and the other one was lazy. Now the one who worked hard, he was able to take himself out of, poverty and work hard and make an earning and make a living, which he left to his son who also worked hard, and this one son was also lazy. So by the time you meet the third generation baby is born in a well-off family and has access to education and everything. But it's not due to his own doing. It's because there was somebody in his forefathers, right, who did that hard work. This other poor fellow, it's not his fault. He's born in a household which doesn't have even food to put on the table, let alone money to educate him. It's not his fault. But yes, his forefathers failed to do it, right? Okay. Now, still, a person says, okay, but still, that poor fellow is born in a Hindu family. Okay, now there's another aspect to this. Now, that person whose forefathers did not choose to accept Islam, therefore they did not get that transitive good. Who is going to give them the chance to accept Islam? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Because he is Al-Hadi. Now go back, if you can see in everything, I keep taking you back to Allah Ta'ala's attributes. When you understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's pretty much no hard cases left. Alright? Allah Ta'ala is Al-Hadi. So yes, he might have gotten hidayah through his forefathers, didn't get it. Might have gotten hidayah through a Muslim friend, didn't get it. So who is left for that person's hidayah? It's not abandoned, it's not finished. It's not game over. That's unfair, then he never had a choice. Allah Ta'ala is Al-Hadi. Now this is the theological understanding of the ulama, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives every single insan, this is one understanding I'm giving you, right? Allah Ta'ala gives every single insan at least one blast of hidayah that is sufficient enough that at least they ponder or wonder, maybe not even about Islam, but about him. This much, that they make a choice in their life to search for him, to be open to the possibility of his existence and believing in him, as opposed to suppressing it and denying it and choosing that, no, I don't need a God in my life. They won't know the word Islam or Sharia or all the details of it, but just him, he gives enough hidayah. Nobody reaches adult age and passes away without getting at least that much hidayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that would have been sufficient had they chosen. Now you see again why free will is important. It comes in, not without their choice. With their choice to embark on a journey of discovering him that would have led to him, he gives them enough hidayah of that in their life. And actually, when you ask, interestingly, almost all the converts I've met, and I've met a fair number, having lived and traveled in a lot of Western countries, when you ask them their story, because this is a very classic thing to do, is to ask them their story, how they came to Islam, they may say whatever they say, but when you read between the lines, so to speak, this is always the story. Somehow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at some point put in their heart this realization of maybe. It starts with a maybe. It doesn't go straight, I woke up and yes, with maybe, that maybe he is. And they chose not to suppress that. They chose to investigate that. They chose to explore that. They chose to pursue that. Their choices and actions converted the maybe into a yes. So when I saw this, that even the converts who were guided, the people who are converts who accept Islam, it began with a maybe for them. So I realized that maybe is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And their ability to convert the maybe into a yes, and others being unable to convert the maybe into a yes, that's exactly the free will, and that's the choice. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Hadi. Now again, if you want to go back to the most basic level, is I would say, look, on the day of judgment, I don't have to answer. Allah is not going to ask me that question. Why did this person not accept Islam? Allah Ta'ala knows what hidayah He did or did not give that person, how many times He gave it, to what extent He gave it, and every time that person refused or accepted that hidayah. It's between that person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What I do know is my Allah Ta'ala is Al-Hadi. That's His attribute, that's His sifat, that's His name. And nothing in the world can change that. And He's Al-Hadi for every single aspect of His creation, let alone humanity. All right? So once you know that, the only injustice would be if somebody didn't get hidayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not getting hidayah from a forefather, not getting hidayah from a friend, that's a separate thing. No person of dawah reached me, that's a separate thing. Injustice would only be if they didn't get hidayah from Allah. And I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Hadi, and He gives hidayah to everyone. How He does it, He knows that. I don't know that about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The details of how He gives hidayah to everyone. All right? This last two things, and then I may be, there's a little bit more. Almost done. Last two things, what did you have? Guidance? Okay, guidance and misguidance. Because I want to show you the other side. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Hadi, Allah ta'ala is Al-Mudhil. He misguides people. So when I was young, this is in 1993. 20 years ago, I can call myself young. 1993, the very first paper I ever wrote in my life on Quran was on this topic. And what I did was I took all the verses in Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about misguiding people. Why? Because for me, at that young age in my life, this was a hard case. I was finding it difficult after having been newly guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah ta'ala could also misguide people. So I chose to investigate this. Where does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talk about this? That He's misguiding people. And that paper, and I actually found it relatively recently when I was going through some very old stuff. Otherwise, it would have been lost forever in the floppy disks and things that nobody can read anymore. People would know, except the elders would know, the floppy disks. Allahu Akbar. Kya zamana tha? Allahu Akbar. So, and I found a hard copy. I found a printout of that somewhere. Right? And I read it again. After, maybe 20 years reading my own paper. Right? But what I did in that paper, and I didn't manage to do everything, but I didn't take but I took some of the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about His misguiding, and what I found in that, and then I can now tell you that at least that part was correct about the paper, is that whenever Allah ta'ala misguides someone, He doesn't misguide them first, and then they make the wrong choices and actions seconds. Always the sequence was the other way. They made the wrong choices and wrong actions first, and He misguided them second. In fact, He misguided them a distant second. The feeling that one gets from that is that Allah Ta'ala gives hidayah, the person refuses it, continues on the wrong path. Then maybe Allah, because Allah knows best, Allah Ta'ala might keep giving them hidayah, and they keep refusing, keep making, and at some point, and this is also there's a point now, which you can call, they cross the tipping point, like people like to say, or the point of no return, where then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so to speak, or addresses them, that okay, if this is the path you seem to keep persistently choosing, I push you on that path myself then, if this is really what you want. That's what it means. Not that the person was a true, sincere seeker of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wondering whether Islam is true or Buddhism is true, and na'udhu billah ta'ala was al-mudil and misguided them towards Buddhism. Not like that. Right? Not like that. So again, it was a lack of understanding in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if only we had understood Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correctly and deeply, as He, again, I keep repeating this to you, to know Allah ta'ala as He wishes to be known, to know Allah ta'ala as He has revealed Himself to be in His Asma'ul Husna, in His Sifat, in the verses in Quran that describe Him, in the hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam that describe Him. That's much more important than going into these, debates about certain aspects of what is istiwa al-arsh, and you'd be amazed what people try to get you into, right? You have to understand who Allah ta'ala is. When you do that, then these things won't be such hard cases anymore, right? Now, if you move to the next slide, 24. So this I've already done for you. The creation of this, I actually started with this. You can show the whole slide. Creation of humanity, the purpose, the whole purpose of a human being. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created humanity for that purpose, to submit, to be His obedient slaves, and His al-hadi, and He's just, so necessarily He must give them that hidayah to be His obedient slaves, because again He said He won't ask them to do something which is not in His wus'ah. His justice demands that He must have placed in our wus'ah and our ability to be His obedient slaves through His hidayah. Now whether I can see that in a person or prove that I can't do that, I personally say, no, look at this person. There's no way they could have ever gotten hidayah. I say, apparently it might appear to be like that, but Allah Ta'ala, this is ghaib. This is part of His ghaib. Alladhina yu'minuna bil ghaib. It's not just that Allah Ta'ala is unseen. The way He operates, His attributes and His actions, His sifat and af'al is also unseen. How Allah Ta'ala's al-hadi is unseen, which you say, no, there's ghaibi hidayat ka nizam. It's unseen. I know He did it. I know when I look at this person, it doesn't seem like they ever got a drop of hidayah in their life. But Allah Ta'ala must have sent it to them, because that's what He says. That's who He is. These is when you build up the workshop of the different verses in Quran and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you come to this. And then, if you were to look at the verses, Allahu Akbar in Quran al-Kareem, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses those who deny Him. Ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. Does that sound like a misguider to you? Does that sound like unfair, unjust Rabb to you? He's addressing Nas, humanity. I can't even remember. Ya ayyuhan nas or Ya insan. Insan, I think, right? He's addressing humanity. Ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. And al-insan here means that insan which is not yet on iman. So that Allah Ta'ala who is revealed, this is how He feels, or this is how He addresses the person who denies Him. So you can't think that Allah Ta'ala is going to be unjust one. This is the izhar of His hidayah. This is Him manifesting that He wants them. And when He wants them, He would have sent them hidayah. Now that's the tragic nature of the human being. And that's also due to their free will. That when Allah Ta'ala wants them, they can still choose not to want Him. That's free will. Allahu Akbar Kabira. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them, He sends hidayah to them. He reveals Quran. He sends anbiya. He sends Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He might even do some asbabi hidayah, some Muslim friend, da'i, etc. But if they choose not to want Him, man sha'a falyakfur. Whoever wants, they can adopt disbelief. So the free will part keeps coming, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes keep coming. There's no paradox. It's a complete concordance. They completely mesh with each other. All right? Then, 2, 3 other topics that people ask us. You see, you can go on and on about this topic, right? Because when when a person is, let's say, stubborn or insistent on their atheism, they just, whenever you answer 10 questions of theirs, they just raise the 11th. They don't realize I just answered 10 of your points, right? Because your claim in the beginning was I answer one of your points, you'll accept it, right? We answered 10 of them. They don't mind. They hit you with the 11th question instantly. The second you give the answer, they hit you with another question. So then I think it's just 2 more questions that I can think of. And then we can then open it up for the double, so Q&A for the morning and for the afternoon both, all right? 2 more questions. One is going back to that issue of, so you can show the whole, we were on slide number 24. If you show the whole thing of slide number 24, so you will see creation of humanity, purpose, freedom, eternity. Still will be this question. Then why does a person, stay forever? So this has to do with the saying of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, innamal a'malu binniyat, intentions and actions. So I will use a story to explain this to you. So imagine if there's a person who apparently, and let's just say that he truly is from the muttaqeen salihin, right? True muttaqi salih mu'min, 80 years old man. And then some, let's say rowdy youth go to him and say, Babaji, how long are you going to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all you do is make ibadah? Why don't you come with us for one night and we'll show you a good time, right? So Babaji will say, no. This is what I do. They say, Babaji, what if you if you were to live for 200 years, you would keep doing this? He would say, yes. Babaji, if you were to live for 1,000 years, you would still do this? He said, yes. If you were to live for 1,000,000 years, you would still be. Then he will ultimately, at some point, it will come out from his tongue, even if I were to live forever, I would keep doing what I do. Istiqamat, right? His niyat is forever. Same story, and there are people like that. 80-year-old Babaji who drinks, who's a Marxist atheist, who doesn't pray, who's never done a single act of ibadah his whole life. Ibadah, not saying akhlaq. He must have spoken many truths. Had not done a single act of ibadah his whole life. So some young guys go to him, say, Babaji, you're 80 years old. Kut to khuda ka khauf karo. Why don't you now finally, you're so old, there's not even much, whatever, why do you even want to keep sinning? Why don't you change, spend a few last months, years of your life in iman and ibadah? He says, no, this is what I am, and they don't back up at all. I will drink whiskey every night. They say, Babaji, what if you were to live 200 years? He said, I would keep doing this. What if you were to live 1,000 years? I would keep doing this. What if you were to live for 1,000,000 years? This is my life. Eventually it will come out for him also. Even if I live forever, I'm not changing what I am. So that's the reality. A person's niyat is forever. Now there are many hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam that also talk about this. One is innamal a'malu binniyat. A second is the Prophet said that you will be raised on the day of judgment based on how you lived. Because if you lived a life in a certain way, it's not excluding tawbah. It means that if you didn't make tawbah of something and you had istiqamat on something, you will be raised with that on the day of judgment, right? What you took with you in the grave, you will take with you out of the grave. Put it that way. If you make tawbah, don't take it with you in. It's not going to come with you when you come out. But you take it in, it's coming out. Allah Ta'ala might forgive it on the day of judgment, but you take it in, it's definitely coming out. It's definitely coming out. All right? So this person's saying, I'll do it forever. So his niyat is forever. His niyat was forever. So their Jannat and Jahannam is forever because that was their niyyah. Now Allah is not going to allow them to live forever in this world. He's going to pull the plug on everybody. Kullu nafsin za'iqatul maut. Every single soul self will have to experience and taste and go through the rite of passage called death. But the reward will be based, or the punishment will be based on their niyyah. And the last and final thing on this free will predestination is slide number 25, and now you can show the whole thing, which is this notion, and I haven't used their terms because I'm sticking to our terms, but in their terms of the philosophical atheist, they call this the problem of evil and the problem of human suffering. They're like, well, what about that? Okay, we won't talk about, now, at this point, they'll say, well, don't talk to me about Iman Kufr anymore, right? Let's talk about evil. So what does it mean that if Allah Ta'ala is merciful as you claim He is, I mean, na'uzubillah, this is how they talk, right? So then why would He allow suffering in this world? Why would He allow evil to happen in this world? All right. So there are several answers to this. The first answer is that, okay, first I would say, okay, what would you want to happen? That Allah Ta'ala should not allow any evil to take place. He should prevent evil to take place. So what would that mean? So the moment somebody raises their hand, let's say to murder someone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stops them. So say, okay, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do that, number one, it would be all miracles. All life would be all miracles all the time. Number two, it would negate free will. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stops the person who wants to do evil from doing evil, free will is finished. There's no free will. I told you it's all about the free will. They have to be free to do the evil. Okay, then they talk about, well, what about the victim? Fine, you're giving this person the freedom to do evil, but the problem is now we have the other word, if you see, they're transitive evil. One is they do evil to themselves. Okay, well, that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when Allah Ta'ala gave them the freedom to do evil, they can do evil to somebody else. So the person who is the victim of their evil, that's not fair. I say, okay. So what you're saying is injustice has taken place. Yes. Okay. What if we could perfectly address that? Just imagine if there was a perfect way to provide perfect justice to that person. So they say, no, there's no system like that on earth. We say, yes, there is no system like that on earth. There's one system, but it's never been implemented on earth except for 1400 years ago. So, but there will be a system like that. There's going to be a day called the Day of Judgment. And on that day, Allah Ta'ala will provide absolute justice and perfect compensation. There's many hadith of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam on what the Muslim will get on the Day of Judgment, on what the poor will get on the Day of Judgment. The victim of any type of oppression, any type of injustice will be compensated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to such an extent that they will wish that much perfect. They will wish that they had been more oppression and evil done to them, so they will get even more compensation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That level of perfection. So the person themselves will feel like that on the Day of Judgment. It doesn't get any more perfect than that. So their compensation will be more than perfect. And then the justice Allah Ta'ala will do to that evil doer who did the evil to that victim, who did the injustice, who did the oppression, that will also be perfect justice. Perfect justice. All right? So that answers the question of why there is evil or why people are allowed to do evil. Or they will ask that, the people... Another answer. Another question asks, well, okay, what about not evil that people do, but they will say, na'uzubillah, what about the evil God does to people? So what do you mean the evil that God does to people? There are people dying of hunger and famine. Nobody is themselves doing that. I said, no, people are doing that. How? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed a system where that if you want, you could actually get complete justice on earth. It's not Allah Ta'ala's decision that you have to wait for the Day of Judgment to get complete justice. He revealed and He kept revealing throughout history through His Anbiya and Deen, perfect justice on earth. So Deen of Islam, if you were to implement it truly, would lead to peace and justice and harmony on earth. But humans chose not to do it. Humans chose not to do it. My brother used to work for the IMF. And the IMF and World Bank once made this report that if the industrialized nations of the world were to give, it was something very small, like 1 or 2% of their grain reserves. Apparently they have reserves. Their grain reserve, grain means wheat and corn and oat and barley, and Allahu Alam, their grain reserves, all global hunger would be eradicated. And I thought that we have ushur, and on top of that we have zakat. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a system that even the economists are saying that if only this much could be given, global hunger and famine would be eradicated. Allah Ta'ala made this system. So that's not unjust. If you make a system that can give people justice on earth and can save them from this type of suffering and harm, and then the suffering and harm that somebody does to them, then Allah Ta'ala gives perfect compensation and absolute justice on the Day of Judgment. And it's even in the Sharia given a way to get perfect justice for that crime on earth as well, were people to implement that. So then the last two ayahs we will then now show you to conclude this, that actually ultimately being guided to deen, if you see on slide number 26, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فمن يرد الله أن يهديه يشرح صدره للإسلام, that whomsoever that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, that He wants to guide them, then He will expand their breast for the deen of Islam. And then the next verse, not in Quran, but the next slide, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran, أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ, that whomsoever that Allah ta'ala does this shara sadr, Allah ta'ala expands their breast for deen of Islam, فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ, that such a person will be on a nur. This person will be nurani. Every Muslim is nurani. Every Muslim will be on a nur. Min Rabbihi, they will be nurani Rabbani. They will be on a nur from their Rabb. This is the level of hidayah Allah Ta'ala gives. Now yes, we might make the mistake that due to our sins and ghaflat, we suppress that nur, we veil that nur, we do acts of sin which are darkness. That's why Allah Ta'ala calls them zulumat in Quran. Why? Because it was in contrast to this nur. Remember this ayah, Surah Zumar, this nur. That when you got that pure initial nur of Iman, and then a person did any sins, then those sins are called zulumat. Darknesses, veils of oppression. On what? On the nur of Iman that Allah Ta'ala gave to a person. And that's the extent of free will. That even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself selects a person from His irada to give them hidayah and shara sadr on Islam, still a person has the free will to choose to sin. And that describes 90% of our ummah today. 90% of Muslims alive were given this hidayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, maybe not even through any real choice or effort on their own, and through His will and wish and hidayah, they got this nur, and they still exercise their free will and freedom to disobey, and they disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they put zulumat on top of that nur. So if nothing else, the sinning believers of this ummah are the greatest hujjah of the existence of free will. Alright? Even in the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine irada and hidayah for us. So these were the long explanation of the hard case. Now, in this, you will still not necessarily get complete understanding, partial understanding. At least it makes a person realize that this whole free will predestination is not a problem for my faith, the way atheists are trying to make it a problem for me. And yes, our knowledge about this is mahdud. Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa karamallahu wajhu famously said that how much I tell you about this? He says, I have enough free will to raise one foot and I don't have enough to raise the other one. Right? So that's a simple way. And Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam once said, but you people can have an answer for that also, that one sahabi asked Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, can anything change my taqdeer? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that dua and amal salih, two things can change your taqdeer. Dua and amal salih. So the more philosophical will say, but Allah Ta'ala must have known that also. Yes, of course Allah Ta'ala knows everything. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what your original taqdeer was, and Allah Ta'ala knows that you would make dua and amal salih to change of course Allah Ta'ala knows that also. But you should at least realize in your perspective, from the choices and actions perspectives, there's a way to a better taqdeer. Alright? Beyond that, if you go real deeper, philosophical, you will understand what I told you. You can never understand this completely. You can never understand completely. So then, what we invite you to do is, why don't you understand what you can understand completely, which is the Quran and Sunnah of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why don't you understand completely what Allah Ta'ala wants you to do, even if you can never completely understand why He wants you to do it. And on the Day of Judgment, you won't be asked or rewarded on how much you understood why he wanted you to do it. You will simply be judged and examined and asked and rewarded based on whether you did what he wanted you to do, right? So the name of the game is that in any case. And there is, and I already outlined for you in the morning, how I think we should begin and proceed in learning and understanding our deen, so we know what will please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right? So now we pause. So 4 to 4:15, and then 4:15 to 4:30. So we can take your questions. So there's some way that so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make you people write, because I do this to the women and I do this to online, so I'm going to do it to the men also, for all fairness. Everybody will write their questions. The women will write them and have to send them. Have you made a way for the women to send them? There's some couple who is taking it. All right. And the online listeners will write on their online, which I'll open that up right now. I'm opening up so I can see your online. And the men will. Yeah, if you wish to ask a question anonymously, you can do that. If you leave your name and email and WhatsApp number, it gives me the advantage that if I don't get to your question, I might be able to contact you with the answer later, right? But if for any reason you wish to ask anonymously, I have no problem with that either, all right? Because there's always only going to be a limited set of questions that we can get through at any time. So you start with the I will when I take them. The other reason I make you people write them down is because I order them and I sometimes combine them. Sort of that is one thing that we do. We do try to take the questions that we feel are most on topic and most beneficial for the audience, for the public audience first. Because sometimes a person might raise a question. That is a good question, but it will only benefit them. All right? Okay, let me start with one question that is on topic while the rest of you write, that has come from the online audience. That Imam Ghazali used philosophical terminology, and you said that we should leave that part of his explanation of tazkiyah on the shelf. So how can we do that precisely? Because that philosophical terminology is, in different parts of his texts. So that's correct. You won't be able to do that yourself. You will need a teacher to do that for you. And this is one of the many things a person needs a teacher for. There'll be a lot of things I mentioned today that you can't do yourself, and this is a perfect example of one of them. So that's why I feel it's better to study Ghazali or Rumi. Maybe, I don't know enough about Iqbal to even say much about that, right? But the Islamic scholarly tradition, with somebody who understands that, and can understand that which parts of it were particular to that context and may not be of benefit or even relevance for people today. And the large part of it, which is still beneficial to people, still to get it from a living scholar who can help apply it to our current and contemporary context. So that is correct. You won't be able to do that yourself, right? If I was to add to this question, because sometimes people still like to read on their own, like I told you should have your readings and have your professors. So Imam al-Ghazali himself told people that they should begin with his book called Bidayatul Hidayah, the beginning of guidance. And if you read that work, you will see that there is no real philosophical terminology in that. Then there is a difference of opinion in Ghazali scholars as to what was his last work. Some feel it was his letter that I've taught sometimes, and it's online, Ya Ayyuhal Walad, and some feel it's his Minhajul Abidin. These are both available in English, Urdu, and Arabic, right? All three of these books. And none of these three have any of that philosophical explanations of things that were maybe needed in his time, but may not be so needed in our time. So for somebody's reading, they could start with these three texts, and then there's certain sections of the Ihya that don't have this, and there's some sections of the Ihya that have a number of sections that have a number of this, so you might want to be guided by a teacher. In absence of a teacher, if you read these things on your own, then you just have to skip through or ignore the more philosophical things and focus on the more direct explanations. All right. So that's one from the online. Now we'll take one from the men. Oh, okay. My Urdu ability to read Urdu handwriting is a little bit slow. I'll scan it, but I may not be able to do it with this. Okay, the Reconciling. Okay. One question is that you had mentioned that the age of Nuh alayhi salam was. Sorry, if I don't ask about the reason about the age of Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, then actually I'm not accepting the age of Allah. It might be the age that Allah Ta'ala mentioned. Then will my iman be intact or not, even though I believe in all of the Quran? So so maybe I work backward. The iman will be intact as long as you believe in all of the Quran. If you wonder about the age of Nuh alayhi salam, that was so long, almost 1,000 years, right? That's also fine. But if you think that it's not possible, that's the only thing that is a problem from the iman perspective. And if you think it's not possible, or you insist that such a thing is impossible due to science, then that is incorrect. And like I mentioned when we initially talked about this in the morning,